All right, good morning. Find a seat. We have a couple tables up here for members of the Maine Climate Council. Every other table is for working groups and everybody else. But you're all special, so thank you for being here. My name is Hannah Pingree. I'm the director of the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, and I'm the co-chair of the Maine Climate Council, and I'm here with Commissioner Melanie Loisem, and you'll be hearing from us off and on throughout the day. But Governor Mills could not be here today, but she wanted to send you a little message of thanks and get going. So with that, I will turn it over to our team to show the video of Governor Mills.
Hello, this is Governor Janet Mills, and welcome to the quarterly meeting of the Maine Climate Council. I'm very sorry I couldn't join you in person today, but I wanted to express my gratitude for the work that you do on behalf of our state. Wow, a room full of scientists, industry leaders, local and state officials of both parties, engaged citizens, united in the fight against climate change. This gathering shows that we've come a long way in the last 85 years since one man in particular first concluded that our planet was warming and that humanity was the cause of that warming. When he published his research in April of 1938, steam engineer Guy Stewart Callender wrote that, quote, "Few of those familiar with the natural heat exchanges of the atmosphere, which go into the making of our climates and weather, would be prepared to admit that the activities of man could have any influence upon phenomena of so vast a scale." Quote, "Such influence is not only possible," he wrote, "but is actually occurring at the present time," end quote. At the time, scientists dismissed G.S. Callender's findings. Generations later, Maine is wielding our own influence to reverse the warming of our planet and to protect this precious place we call home. Almost 4 years ago to the day, I spoke to world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly. I said then that Maine would not wait to act on climate change. I pledged that our state would be carbon neutral by 2045 and that we would do our part to stop polluting the planet. Since then, I'm proud to say that Maine people have followed the bold vision we outlined in our climate action plan, Maine Won't Wait, to transition to clean energy and to ensure that their communities can withstand the effects of climate change. We set a goal of installing 100,000 heat pumps in Maine by 2025 to reduce our dependency on expensive, polluting fossil fuels and to save people money on their home heating bills. Thousands of Maine people answered the call. And thanks to them, and thanks to the hundreds of small businesses who install heat pumps, our state has hit our goal 2 years ahead of schedule, putting Maine at the forefront for heat pump installations nationwide. A few weeks ago, I welcomed White House Climate Advisor Ali Zaidi to celebrate Maine's leadership and to announce a new goal of installing 175,000 additional heat pumps by 2027. Maine people are doing more than just installing heat pumps. They've also weatherized more than 9,000 homes and registered more than 11,000 electric and 28,000 hybrid vehicles. We've increased the number of clean energy jobs in our state to nearly 15,000, and our use of renewable energy on our grid to nearly 50%. To accelerate our pace, I've directed my energy office to draft legislation requiring that 100% of our electricity come from clean energy by 2040. The steps we're taking towards a clean energy future are reducing costs for Maine people, they're creating new jobs and career opportunities, and they're protecting us from the ravages of climate change. And we're not taking those steps alone. Almost 200 communities across Maine are now making their own transition to clean energy and strengthening their critical infrastructure to withstand the impacts of climate change. For example, the Aroostook Band of Micmacs is utilizing a $50,000 grant from our Community Resilience Partnership to boost the solar power of its tribal fish hatchery in Presque Isle. And the City of Rockland is using a state grant from the partnership, as well as federal funds, to plan for and complete urgent upgrades to their waterfront, which is facing more degradation due to storms. These changes matter. In a year marked by devastating heat waves, damaging storms, and other extreme weather events caused by climate change, at the time of this recording, we've had at least 3 severe rainstorms and floods in Maine this year. It can be hard to hold on to hope, but we are making a difference. We have surpassed many of the goals we set for ourselves, and we are well on our way to achieving others. In fact, just last week, I was in New York City as the co-chair of the U.S. Climate Alliance, setting new goals modeled after Maine's progress to make our buildings more efficient nationwide, cutting our carbon emissions, and cutting costs for American families. Maine is becoming a world leader on the path to a clean energy future, in large part thanks to all of you. As you meet today, and as you chart our path forward in the fight against climate change, I hope that you recognize how critical your work is. Your work is so important to me, to the state of Maine, to the nation, and to our planet. People everywhere are waking up to the urgency of climate change. This issue is not new to us. The folks rebuilding washed out roads, the fishermen heading further out to sea to fish, the farmers waiting weeks for hay to dry. All of us who follow the news and learn from the stories, we all know that climate change is real and that we can't wait to address it on all fronts. You all are on the front lines of this worldwide effort. And we know that this is a code red for humanity. Maine won't wait. Maine will lead. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, AV Technic, for the circuit was popped. They're going to do a little rerouting of power, but that's stressful, so thank you guys very much. And actually, I just want to kick it off thanking folks like these guys who work behind the scenes, my staff, Melanie's staff, all the folks who work to pull off this day. Obviously, it looks perfect, but it takes a lot of work, so a huge thank you to them as we kick off today. And also to the Augusta Civic Center who hosts us and all the people who will serve us lunch. We are incredibly grateful. So huge thank you to Governor Mills, my boss. She was sad that she could not be here today. As she said, when we kicked off this process in September of 2019, she had just returned from New York City, telling the United Nations, first governor in Maine history, that Maine would not wait to act on climate change. And she said that in the video. And I will say now, a year later, she just returned from New York City last week, where she stood with the Biden administration, governors from Washington State, New York State, as well as 25 states around the country, to make a new pledge around buildings that we will work harder and faster to decarbonize them. And as you will hear a lot about today, Maine has led the country on heat pump deployment, and they set a new national goal to deploy 20 million heat pumps by 2030. So Governor Mills is on the front lines. We're really proud of her and happy to work for her, and I'm pleased that you could all again join us today. So we are here today because in 2019 the Maine legislature passed a law overwhelmingly, including Republican State Senator David Woodsom, who is the sponsor of the governor's bill, with leaders on both sides of the aisle in support, who all said that Maine needed a plan. And we don't just need an action plan, but we must require that action be accomplished in law by 2030 and 2050. LD 1679 is the basis for our work. It is the governing statute of the Maine Climate Council. And we are all here to kick off this process again for a second time because of that law. We know today that the leadership of Maine has never been more needed. You will hear today about the incredible progress that we have made since 2019. You'll hear and see people who are leading on the front lines of action. You will also hear about the increasing urgency from scientists, from fishermen, from our youth, from people from all parts of our state of all ages, whose lives are being impacted by the challenges of climate change. I know that no one in this room needs to be told. We all feel it. We are watching the news from around the world, from our own backyards. Every summer and winter, we're observing it, watching nature, observing storms, watching in our day-to-day lives that climate change is here. Its impacts are worsening. You'll hear today about the challenges that brings for our communities and our economy. But you will also hear from our state's economic development leader about some of the opportunities for jobs and growth that come with climate solutions. We believe Maine is uniquely positioned for that opportunity. Today we are here because Maine hasn't waited. We have created a solid base of strategies and action in Maine. But that plan, Maine Won't Wait, requires updates every 4 years because of our law, but our action plan also demands our constant attention to tweak what needs improvement, to respond to new funding and policy opportunities from the federal government and private markets, to advance more ideas where we need to move more quickly, and respond to the changes that we are seeing in our communities. When Maine's Climate Council advanced our first plan in 2020, many of you in this room were with us on Zoom. We were at the height of COVID. Actually, the governor was quarantined at the Blaine House. It was an uncertain time, and we had big and bold ideas. We had a great plan, but we had no idea how we were going to pay for it, and we had little support at the federal level. Today, just 3 years later, we've had landmark infrastructure, climate, and energy legislation advance in Washington, D.C. It provides support for our state and local action through new incentives for clean energy, support to rebuild our infrastructure back with greater resilience to climate impacts, and even specific support for state climate planning processes like ours that will support all of our work in the coming months. You will hear today that we are proud of how far we've come as a state, but we have much more to do, including meeting the opportunity presented to us over the next 5 years through new federal funding opportunities, ensuring that our state's low-income and disadvantaged communities are centered in this work, and most importantly, ensuring that we meet our essential goals to combat this crisis. So that is where you all come in, the Maine Climate Council. I'm not going to read every name on this slide, but obviously Melanie and I are incredibly happy to have the 39 folks who have signed up to be on the Maine Climate Council, including my co-chair, Melanie Loisum, Maine legislators, Tribal Representative Ambassador Bryant, many commissioners in state government, some of whom are here today, who really put in the time and effort with their staffs to make this work. I also want to introduce Dr. Terry Va, who is our most recent designee. She will be as famous as Dr. Shaw, I'm sure. She's the head of the Maine CDC. Incredibly happy to have her here in Maine and as a member of the Maine Climate Council. We have our key partners from Efficiency Maine and Maine Housing who do a ton of heavy lifting, partners from philanthropy, environmental advocates, scientific experts, experts in community resilience. Last but not least, we have representatives from Maine's older adults, local chambers, municipalities, large and small businesses, the energy sector, foresters, farmer, fishermen, labor and trade groups, and maybe our most passionate on climate action, a member from Maine's youth, who you will hear from later this morning. Yeah, go youth. Maine Climate Council is also led by many staff across state government and 8 different working groups. We have a science and technical subcommittee, an equity subcommittee, and the 6 working groups which many of you in this room are on. The buildings and infrastructure and housing, coastal and marine, community resilience, energy, transportation, and natural and working lands. You will hear later today from our co-chairs who do a ton of heavy lifting, and they will talk about the work ahead in each of their working groups. And then, of course, many of you in this room are members of working groups. I also want to point out that there are several hundred people who are on Zoom. When we first kicked off this first Climate Council meeting, I think Zoom existed, but barely. I think we were broadcasting out to the world, but I honestly can't remember. It was pre-pandemic, and we've erased that part of our brain. But now, obviously, hundreds of people from across the state, members of our working groups who can't travel as far, are able to tune in and be a part of this meeting today. So I'm actually going to quickly just ask all of you to stand up, not at once. So if you're a member of the Maine Climate Council here today, if you're one of the 39, please stand up. Awesome. If you're a co-chair of a working group, any of them, or a subcommittee, stand up. Some of you are hiding out the back of the room. Obviously, it's the coastal and marine, the fishing guys. They don't like to be in front. And if you are a member of a working group here today, please stand up. A huge thank you to all of you, and a special thank you actually to the many members of the Maine legislature who are also serving on the working groups. Your presence and time and commitment to this process here and in the legislature is a big deal, so thank you very much for being here. So now I'm going to pass it off to Commissioner Melanie Loisem to sort of walk through some slides, some of which will be familiar, but an important recap of where we are. Oh, sorry. Here's the agenda for the day. I've already told you all about it. So passing it off to Melanie.
Which one do I?
Big green.
The big green. All right. Excellent. A big green button. I love it. Morning, everybody. I want to reiterate my thanks as well for your participation in the work of the Climate Council. I will use the four-letter word work fairly often over the next year. For those of you who've done this before, you know that as we head into this next cycle of updating the plan, there will be a lot of conversation, some really deep thinking, and we're going to be relying very heavily on all of you and your great minds to help us identify additional strategies and recommendations for how we can continue to make really important progress here in the state. So what you have in front of you are our statutory goals. So just a reminder, our target is to reduce gross greenhouse gas emissions by 45% below 1990 levels by 2030. And 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. Those are aggressive goals, but we are on target already, and we are optimistic that with the help of you all and the people of the state of Maine, we will absolutely be able to achieve those. We also have a new target that was added by law a couple of years ago to also achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. And ultimately, all of the strategies that we're going to be talking about will be embodied in an update to the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan that we will all be delivering by December 1st of 2024. So you know what your due date is for that assignment. When we look at gross greenhouse gas emissions in the state, the Department of Environmental Protection does a biennial emissions inventory. We use models that are recognized nationally and internationally, and we've continued to see that fossil fuel combustion is the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And the majority of the emissions from fossil fuel combustion continue to come from our transportation sector. We're a fairly rural state. We are distributed widely geographically, and we continue to rely very heavily on single driver transportation to get around the state. And so you'll see in the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan many strategies focused on reducing transportation emissions and electrifying our transportation sector, because that is the sector where we need to achieve the largest reductions, because they are currently the largest contributor. So this is the cover for our wonderful Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan. I believe there are copies on the table this morning. In case anybody doesn't have one, bring one home to your friends. My giant green button isn't working. There we go. We are very proud to have received a national award from the American Planning Association. The Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan was designated as the best sustainability plan in the country in 2022. So that, we're very proud of that. Our climate plan has 4 major goals: to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that one's fairly obvious; to make Maine more resilient to the impacts of climate change, because as Director Pingree said, it's here, it's happening already, and so it's not just about reducing emissions, but it's also about dealing with the situation that we have at hand and the impacts that we're seeing to Maine's communities. And we want to do that in a way that is going to foster economic growth and opportunity. So this doesn't have to be something that costs us in order to address this challenge. We want to find ways to do this in a way that is economically beneficial and to advance equity through Maine's response. Within the plan, there are 8 overarching action strategies: to embrace the future of transportation, modernize our buildings, reduce carbon emissions in our energy and industrial sectors, to grow our clean energy economy and to grow jobs, to protect our environment, our working lands, and to increase carbon sequestration. That's important for meeting that carbon neutrality goal in 2045. We want to invest in climate-ready infrastructure so that we're not constantly seeing culverts be blown out every time we have a storm. And we need to engage people and communities in all of this work that we're doing. There's a great website that has lots of information, our dashboard, about the work that's been done in the last several years. It's a really cool interactive mapping tool, so you can zoom in and out. You can see where investments are being made, where projects have happened, which communities have been engaged in these projects. So this is a great modern tool for being able to identify all the things that we've been doing in the last few years and where the investments have been going. As I mentioned, DEP does a biennial emissions report. This is the way that we track our progress. So every 2 years, we use emissions estimates to try to measure our progress against those statutory goals of gross emission reductions. And we also, as of 2022, have for the first time added in an assessment of carbon sequestration as well to measure our progress against that carbon neutrality goal. This is the website, mainewon'twait.org. If there's any materials that you are not familiar with that have been produced by the Climate Council, all of them are there. This will have links to meeting information. So as we're doing our work over the next year or so, this will be a great reference point for you, and you should be able to navigate from this location to any of the information you're looking for related to the work of the Council. So, our timeline. December 1st, 2020, we delivered the first plan. In May of this year, the governor announced the appointments to the Climate Council, so thank you all for accepting those and appreciate again you being here. So for the next several months between now and June of 2024 is when the really hard work happens. So you'll participate in working groups, we will have task forces, there will be subcommittees, and that's where we're going to ask you all to put your heads together, take a look at the strategies and recommendations in our 2020 plan, and identify where the gaps are and the things that we want to be focusing on to update that plan. So we're not creating a whole new plan. We're going to build on the progress and the successes we've already had and keep making that better. In September of 2024, the recommendations of the working groups will be delivered to the council. And that's when we start boiling that down into the 4-year updated report, or the plan that will deliver December 1st, 2024. And now I am really pleased to introduce to those of you who haven't met him before, David Plum from the Consensus Building Institute. He was our illustrious facilitator last time around, keeps it interesting and fun, and so he is going to walk you through some of the kind of fun exercises he'll be doing with us at these meetings.
Thank you, Melanie. Thanks, everybody. It's nice to be back. It's nice to be back, part of the process. So thanks for having me back. So this is one of the few times where we'll ask you to take out your phone. Usually we frown upon these things, but actually right now, if you're in the room here, I'd love for you to pull out your cell phone, and there's a cute little table tent on your table. And then there's a QR code at the bottom of this table tent. And so you're going to have to share. And this is going to bring you to a survey. And the survey is going to ask you the following question. You can see it on the screen right now. And I will say, for those of you online, a link is being dropped in the chat as we speak by my colleague, Cameron Hager. So Cameron's dropping that in the chat. Cameron's going to open up the voting in just a sec, or right now. He can open it right up right now. And so we're going to start to see responses. And we can actually hold on the responses just for a second, Daniel. Let's go back to the question, if you don't mind. And the question is, it's December next year, right? It's December next year. We've finished this revision. We really like it. What are 3 words that describe it? Okay? So Cam, make sure that voting's open. We're going to hold off on responses just for a second. We're going to let it sit for a second. And first we'll show the responses from here in the room, and then we'll show responses from the folks who are listening on the webinar. All right? If anybody is having a hard time with a QR code here in the room, we actually have little pieces of paper, and you're welcome to write some words down on the paper too if your phone's not working. All right? So let's just give it a moment. Think of 3 words that describe this. Let's give it a moment. Okay. Cam, if you can make sure that voting's open, we'll solve any technical glitches, and sorry about that. Let's try it one more time and see if this works. I'll try it myself as we're doing. Oh, should be open now, folks. If you're having a hard time, try one more time. It coming in now? We can see the results. All right, so we'll hold off on sharing results just for a second. We won't want to contaminate your own individual creative thoughts here. Try one more time if folks are having a hard time. And I welcome folks who are listening in on the webinar. Click on that link that should be in the chat, and you can enter in 3 words as well. You're really pleased with how this thing worked. It's December next year. What words describe it? Raise your hand if you need a little more time in the room. Just raise your hand and say, I need a little more time. Hang on a second. Okay, I see a few hands. Okay. Okay, Daniel, why don't you go ahead and show the results from the room and see what we got. Okay, let's take a look at this for a second. Wow, it keeps moving around. It's very exciting. Okay. All right, so what do you see? I see some things. Wow, they keep moving. Maybe Cam, yeah, voting is closed. Excellent. That'll calm things down a little bit. Okay. Look at those words, right? Ambitious, equitable, bold, comprehensive, effective, fantastic. Just before I show the one from the public, I just want to check, Cameron, any problems with the public one that would prevent us from showing it? Just to check. If anybody's reading the newspaper recently. Okay. Cam's not giving the heads up not to show it, so Daniel, go ahead and show the one from the folks who are tuning in the webinar. Wow. Look at that. Very similar. Okay. Equitable, actionable, realistic. Wow, there's like people want to clap. Go ahead and clap. Yes. Okay, we're going to save these as a little time capsule, right? And as we move forward and the working groups do their work, right? And then the climate counselors review that working group work next year and go into the fall next year. Let's circle back and see how we're doing. All right? Thanks, everyone. I'm going to turn it back to Hannah, I guess, or Melanie. Thanks. And you'll see a little more of me later.
You can keep that.
Oh, I'll keep this one. Thanks. Got it.
Thanks so much, David. See? He makes it more fun, doesn't he? Much better than listening to me talk at you. All right, so next up, it is my honor to introduce the 3 co-chairs of our Science and Technical Subcommittee. When the Climate Council was created in statute, one of the things that was really important was to have an independent and objective group of scientists to help inform the work that we all do. And so they've already been having some meetings because they will be delivering to all of us their updated report on the state of the science around climate change in Maine, and then we're going to be using that information to help inform the work that all of our working groups and the rest of the council is going to be doing. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Ivan Fernandez, Stephen Dixon, and Susie Arnold. I don't know which one of you is the designated victim to do the presentation.
They're all coming.
All right.
Oh, no. How do you go back?
Red.
I'm red, green, color deficient. This works
Oh, no.
well.
Little button. Sorry. There you go.
Before I push the wrong button, which is back?
Back.
Oh, okay.
Forward.
Got it.
Big green is forward.
Thanks, Chief.
Oh. Big question.
Okay.
Ask them.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. We just had some fun with the word games. This is not really the fun part. In fact, as probably everyone knows and has been part of, scientists have discussions about, well, do they really want to hear another talk about all the bad stuff? And we want to just talk about the good stuff for a change, which we do, but we're here for a reason. It's, I think I can speak on behalf of the 3 of us that it's an honor to be here, to do this, to represent all of the science that goes into this and all the scientists online and in the room that are part of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. Indeed, as Commissioner Loisem mentioned, we've already convened and begun our work, so any of the working groups that want to be first, it's too late. And our goal is to provide the very best science to help in this decision process. I guess I better not step on that. It's also not an accident that we're at this point in the program. It's not because we're such great entertainers, which you fully recognize, but because this work that we've done here in Maine around climate change and the development of Maine Won't Wait has in fact been strongly grounded and informed by science from the very beginning. And I can't help but reflect on 4 years ago at Maple Hill Farm, I think we were, talking about early in the program the science around climate change and why we had convened. And a great deal has happened, of course, since then. It's hard work. It's demanding, and if it wasn't, we wouldn't be doing the right thing, and so there's more to come. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, oh, by the way this is arranged, I'm not depressed and looking down. The monitor's down there, so I'm going to have to look down there. I can't see my own screen, and this is not the way I lecture at the university. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee was created in 2019 to identify, monitor, study, and report out to the Council and to the working groups findings and recommendations related to climate change in the state and its effects on the state's climate, species, marine and coastal environments and natural landscape, and on the oceans and other bodies of water. And in fact, I think that is what we are currently engaged in and have accomplished in the past to date as part of our process. This morning we're going to take a little bit of time, and the 3 of us will share some thoughts, sort of high-level thoughts about where we are relative to climate change and science that informs that climate change in 2023, and then we'll do a little deeper dive in the marine sector as an example of the kind of science that we're dealing with, and many of you in the room are also deeply involved in that effort. On a global scale, where do we get our informing science from? And as probably everyone fully recognizes, it comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a joint program of the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environmental Program. And some of you are probably familiar with many of the covers here. These are the various reports that are issued as climate assessment to inform the policymaking around climate. They began in 1990. We knew in 1990, as many of you have heard me say before, what was causing climate change, what to expect, and what we should do. We still have that charge in front of us to accomplish. The most recent report is AR6, Assessment Report number 6, creatively named. The far right cover there was the first report from Working Group 1 of AR6, talking about the physical science. And typically these are carried out in a set of reports around the physical science of climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. On the right, there are 3 additional reports. Some of you have seen them or are familiar with them. And these are special reports that were put together and developed specifically to inform the process of the implementation of the targets that were laid out in the Paris Accord in 2015. And one having to do with oceans and the cryosphere, the frozen parts of the planet, less so every day. One having to do with land, and then global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade. As probably everyone knows, the Paris Accord set out the target of 2 degrees centigrade with an aspirational goal of 1.5 degrees centigrade of global warming in order to avoid the worst of climate impacts. And this report specifically was charged with delivering information about what were the consequences of exceeding those goals. In March of this year, the synthesis report from AR6 was issued that basically closes out the cycle for this AR6 process. Synthesis reports typically are not new science. They are exactly what they sound like, synthesis reports, but they come out a couple of years later after the process began. And so a lot of science happens and a lot of climate change evidence develops. So it does emphasize synthesis, but it particularly emphasizes the most important messages of the day. And some of the messages from this report were that most of the indicators of climate change are continuing to accelerate. That the rates of our reductions in greenhouse gas emissions around the planet are inadequate to reach the targets that we've laid out. And I think an important message was that every increment of progress matters. We pay a lot of attention to 1.5 degrees centigrade as the target, and we hear more about it in the press. And we hear more about 1.5 than 2 between now and since 2015 because the urgency has increased and the evidence has increased, and therefore the focus on a more aggressive target has increased. But every increment of warming avoided matters, and it matters more if we avoid it today than if we avoid it 10 and 20 years from now. It matters in lives, it matters in the quality of the environment, it matters in our economy, and it matters what we leave to generations to follow. It also highlighted that we're approaching continuously tipping points in the climate system, and some of them are irreversible. And equally importantly, the synthesis report highlighted that there is a wide range of strategies in which to respond, both in mitigation and adaptation, and that's what we're all here engaged in doing. So there were important messages that continue to today and from that synthesis report. Certainly, if we look around, we know that there's plenty of evidence that the climate is warming. And so that's the global land and ocean temperature anomalies over the last 174 years. The past 9 years have been the warmest years in that record. The 10th year was 2010, so it wasn't that long ago. And there's a 95% or better confidence interval around 2023 being one of the top 2 warmest years in the record. So we are continuing in the wrong direction relative to the warming. We all know we had a fascinating summer in a lot of different ways. August 2023 was the warmest August on record, warmer than all the other months except for July 2023, and then combined that made summer of 2023 the hottest summer on record for the planet. Global sea surface temperatures hit record highs for 5 months running. Global sea ice reached record lows, particular lows in Antarctica in this year. So the climate is changing. Some of you have seen in the press that little logo there in the upper left-hand corner, the Climate Reanalyzer. It's a tool developed by Dr. Sean Burkle, our state climatologist at the University of Maine. And it's also used increasingly widely. It appears in the press. I encourage you to Google it at the Climate Change Institute. That's a trace of the last several decades of the annual temperatures with the typical statistics, the dotted lines are the means and 2 standard deviations, et cetera, et cetera. This is this year. And so when we talk about temperatures being off the charts, this is one of those charts where it is, in fact, out of the realm of what we've experienced. And that's because we continue to slide up a rising background. The AR6 report predicted and described that the changing climate is and will continue to cause increased extreme heat, both more frequent, more intense, heavy rainfalls that I have to tell no one in the room about, more frequent and more intense, increased frequency and intensity of drought, increased fire weather, and certainly impacts to our oceans that include acidification, warming, and the loss of oxygen or deoxygenation. And what happens in the world certainly happens here in Maine. And so we too continue to warm in the state of Maine, increased frequency of extreme heat events. Schools in Maine on September 8th closed because of heat. This is vacation land. Heavy rainfalls. Every year I have new slides, as Commissioner Loiza mentioned, of these intense rainfalls that are causing damage, wreaking havoc on farms and forests and infrastructure, and certainly on our roads. This is one of the washouts from June 29th. As far as the Maine records, 2023 was the second wettest summer on record. Fire weather is kind of a new entry for us here in Maine. And so this is a shot from the Climate Reanalyzer of smoke in our atmosphere from fires that are happening somewhere else. And we know we've seen increasing amounts of fire. If I'm not mistaken, where'd Melanie go? But right now, yesterday and today, the air quality is not down, but the upper atmosphere haze is yet another fire. And this one's blowing in from Alberta. And so that's a new dimension. The smoke that reaches the ground is compromising the advancements in air quality that we've made over the last several decades. Warming Gulf of Maine, you'll hear more about. It's been record high temperatures in the North Atlantic in 2023. And of course, earlier this month, we were treated to Hurricane Lee, which other parts of the world have been impacted by. And we can expect that we will be more likely to have those kinds of risks into the future. So it's in our backyard, and that's why we're here talking about it. Climate change in the news, certainly we see it all the time. Every year some of you have seen them. I make a slide like this with some of the extreme events that we continue to see in the news, and fire and drought, wildfires across Canada. Every year there's the tragedy of entire communities being lost for one reason or another, hurricanes or fires, and this year is no exception. We also had wildfires in Nova Scotia, which not only impacted our air quality, but it's a little too close for comfort right here in Maine. And flooding in Vermont, likewise, a little too close for comfort. This is the news, though. This is not science. This is not what we are tracking working in the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. And so the question is, how is this related to climate change? And we need to be careful that we don't just follow the news cycles, with due respect to the press that may be here, but that we focus on the science in order to inform our decision making. We do know, however, that the science of attribution has advanced, and that is the science of figuring out how much of what we are experiencing is attributable to human-induced climate change, the stuff that we're doing with greenhouse gases. And most of these events have some component, some level of intensification of frequency or intensity itself attributable to these effects. The World Weather Attribution Center, for example, did an analysis of some of the fires in the early summer in Quebec up until data from July, and found that they were about 50% more intense, that seasons of this severity are at least 7 times more likely to occur now, and that peak fire weather, the worst, are at least twice as likely and likely to be 20% more intense due to human-induced climate change. The heat waves that we hear about and see and read about around the world were virtually impossible without a human-induced climate change. But now in regions like the US and Mexico and Southern Europe, they can be expected on a 1 to 15 or 10 to 15 year cycle. Heat waves in China that we experienced this past year, 50 times more likely as a result of human-induced climate change. So we are causing the intensification of what we are experiencing. And it costs money. From January to September of this year, this nation, the U.S., experienced 23 separate billion-dollar disasters, the largest number of billion-dollar disasters since records have been kept, and you'll notice that was up until September, and the beginning of September. And so basically there's 4 more months to go to add to that record. So climate change is real, it's here, it's impacting us in many ways. It will continue on the trajectory that it is, and so the work that we're doing here is so important. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee focuses on the science that's most important for the decision-making we do here in Maine. Many of you will recognize the report on the left that I'm sure you've read cover to cover. It was the 370-page science assessment that the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee did in support of Maine Won't Wait and the work that all of you were doing in moving to that objective. The other report was a one-year update that we released in 2021. And those are just some of the warming trends here in Maine, with the minimums down there warming faster than the medians or the maximums. We actually broke records for minimum warming this year here in the state of Maine, but not of the maximums. And so we met on August 31st to begin the process, which we're deeply engaged in, and a lot of people here and online are working really hard in order to provide the best information available. What we're going to do now is segue off so that my colleagues can talk a little bit about kind of the nature of the science that we dig into, and particularly in the marine sector. So.
Thank you, Ivan. It's my privilege to speak with you today. I'm a co-chair, Steve Dixon. I'm the state geologist, and I'll go over some of the things that we might be able to include in the report, but this is not meant to be any comprehensive overview because the work of STS is just beginning. It's the experts in our group that will help bring the most important pieces of information to the reports that we write. But as an example, river flooding is one of the categories we know will be very significant. We will have to address that is not only in Maine, but all throughout the United States, growing in importance. Droughts, as Ivan just mentioned, is something that's very important in many ways throughout the state of Maine for both industry and agriculture and drinking water. Droughts can affect groundwater, and droughts can affect saltwater intrusion, as can sea level rise. Precipitation extremes. The extremes are what we are most keyed in on now. It's not just the longer term trends, a little bit here, a little bit there, but we, as Ivan showed, the temperature records pushing the extremes to new levels. Rainfall trends are high. The map on the right shows June, July, and August from the Climate Reanalyzer this year. So we all know we had a wet spring and summer. Mud season's sort of here for months at a time. We've also had flash floods. The picture on the left is the June 29th storm in western Maine that resulted in a presidential disaster declaration for the state from heavy rainfall. This is the fourth presidential disaster declaration in Maine for heavy rainfall in 2 years. So we're having two big events to contend with in that time space. Groundwater was not very thoroughly addressed in the last assessment. We will look at it more completely in this one because there's been a lot of interest in depletion of groundwater and the sustainability of groundwater during times of drought or too much rain. Monitoring of aquifers is important. There are 49 monitoring stations in Maine. In the map on the right, there are fewer than 49. There are about a 10 or 12 blue dots, which show the water levels just this fall. But because of all the rainfall we've had, we have high water levels in the ground also. So this National Groundwater Monitoring Network is something that the U.S. Geological Survey and the Maine Geological Survey are working on. We've been fortunate enough to receive some additional money in the state here to enhance and expand the groundwater monitoring network. We'll be able to analyze over time, not these short newsworthy events, but the trends over time in the aquifers, how droughts affect the water levels, how frequent and widespread dry wells are, and even look at saltwater intrusion. Other work turning into more of the coastal zone that the scientific assessment will build on will be new because there is new coastal elevation data for the state of Maine. We'd like to thank our NOAA partners for flying LiDAR over the state of Maine in 2022 and 2023. We have now a nice new snapshot of elevations along the coast. This is the backbone for inundation mapping that we do for storm surge or from sea level rise, or even things like shown here on this image of how high a hurricane can come over the land. So the coastal elevation data sets are coming out now. We'll be able to use them. One of the best ways that can be used is for wave run-up modeling. So this is a case where the models show the surf coming up onto the land, how high it comes, how forceful it is. And the Maine Department of Transportation is working on this right now with a consulting agency. It's going to provide really cutting-edge information. It'll be ongoing while we do this assessment, but it will provide some very helpful information when it comes to something like designing road infrastructure, water treatment plants, things like that up and down the coast, the working waterfront scenarios. Sea level rise and storm surge, of course, will be addressed one more time. We will try and build on what we have done before. This really matters because it's not just sea level rise, it's the combination of that with storms, surge, and the surf action, the wave action. This picture was taken by one of our volunteer citizen scientists on Gooch's Beach. They've been monitoring the beach now for quite some time. This is a piece of surf hitting the seawall at Gooch's Beach and going straight up. The seawall is about my height, so this is, much higher than I am. The water brings up the sediment, the sand, overwash, flooding down the roads. This happens and can happen in natural systems and in those with engineered seawalls, and we have about 5,000 acres of this kind of a vulnerable setting in our beach and dune environment in the coast of Maine. So when you think about sea level rise, you also have to think about sea level rise pushing higher and higher the water levels that can produce the surf and overtopping and flooding. Here we have a graph on the right that shows an updated version of what we had in our 2020 assessment. And when time rolls by and we work on this assessment, we'll even provide a newer update to this chart. In the blue line, you see the Portland tide gauge data. So the tides going up and down, being a little fickle with a lot of different forces, but showing the increase in tides since 1912. The three colored lines on the right show projections based on a 2017 assessment by NOAA that we used in the last assessment, but now it has the more recent tide gauge built onto it. So The Maine won't wait scenario aims for the middle scenario, 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050. And that little blue line that's approaching that central line or middle scenario is actually, I think we'll know in another couple of months, probably going to exceed that central line. So the rate of sea level rise is coming up and accelerating. You can look at the Maine Geological Survey dashboard anytime. It has tide gauge data for all the 6 stations along the Maine coast. You can query that. You can see what the trends are. We update this monthly. The short-term trend shown on the left is about 3.5 millimeters per year. That amounts to about 1.2 feet per century rate of rise. Ivan talked about breaking records. We are breaking records with the tides every month now. August 2023 was the highest tide ever recorded in Portland since records were began in 1912. In the top right panel in blue, you see the sea level rise trends. The short-term trend, 3.5, compared to the long-term trend from 1912 is about 2 millimeters per year. So this is an 80% increase. That is based on data from the red line. There's a little snippet of a graph there. The red line is the last 30 years of data, and the blue line is the long-term trend. So you can see that the rate of sea level rise in the most recent 3 decades is up from what it has been historically. And I also like to point out in that graph the year 2010. That was a really high year for sea level. It was an anomaly, if you will, and it went back down. 2023 is beating that anomaly by a significant amount. And in the lower right panel, it's a little bit hard to see, but the black line is what has happened in 2023 from the beginning in January, and we haven't obviously gotten the September data set up here yet because it's not quite the end of the month. But the real trend here is June, July, and August all set records. And these, I think of it as the Sea Level Rise Olympics. These are the gold medal for over 110 years worth of data are just happening just this summer. So the water is high, and we don't know if it'll stay high or go back down, but this will be addressed more thoroughly in our assessment. June, for example, the water levels at the tide gauge, the high tide, the mean tide, were 9 inches above the long-term average, okay? So 9 inches is, if we're looking at 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050, we're inching up right now. There's some other variations besides glacial melting, thermal expansion of the oceans that mess with the tidal heights. The moon's orbit, gravitational pull, creates the tides, right? So the lunar orbit varies on an 18.6-year cycle, and we won't do an astronomy lesson here, but the little yellow line going up and down shows there's a pumping action by the lunar gravitational pull. And if the long-term blue line is just sort of an average trend line for rising sea level, the red line represents the combination of those two. So sea level is influenced by the moon's orbit, and we don't really pay too much attention to that, but we've got a supermoon coming up this weekend. We've got some king tides coming. But the red line shows we've been in sort of a mild level or almost even downward phase for the last 4 or 5 years in this cycle when you combine the orbit influence with the rising tides. So we have about another, maybe till 2030, when that lunar influence has been backing down sea level rise, will go away, and in fact, we will probably see an uptick in sea level rise. And it really has nothing to do with other factors producing sea level rise. So that's just to say we've maybe had a reprieve even in the data we're looking at already. The king tides is not a scientific term, but it's a term it's a household term for the highest tides of the year. And when king tides come around, there's nuisance flooding, or there can be a little bit of wind blowing onshore and the parking lots start to get wet. The salt marshes stay underwater for a longer period of time. There can be more erosion along the shoreline. When sea level rise comes up, the rate of the frequency, if you will, of king tides will increase. So I think one of the ways we will feel sea level rise is the working waterfronts, the roads, the culverts are all underwater more often as sea level rise comes up even a small amount. And in the last assessment, we talked about the statistics of that, and we'll revisit that more carefully this time too. Storm surge is the way that we have coastal flooding in the winter. So the surge is the amount of the water above the predicted high tide. In the center graph, it's the green line, and the predicted tide's the blue line, and the difference is the purple line down the middle. And the storm comes through for 1 or 2 days, you get extra high tides. Winter Storm Elliott was a kicker last year. In December 23rd, it was almost a 100-year event. The water level rose to just within a few inches of that 100-year event, so it was a near miss. It was a king tide that had occurred on, and it only took a 2.4-foot surge. 2.4 feet is really nothing special. However, because the water was high, it caused a lot of beach erosion because the storm had a lot of wave action. On the left is Reed State Park. That's the dune scarp in Reed State Park, which is about 4 feet high, that was produced from that. As a result of that one event even, we think that the beaches this summer were about 5 to 7 feet more narrow than they were the summer before. It takes a couple of years minimum for the dune system to recover from such an event. So if storms come with greater frequency or at higher water levels, dune erosion will become a more serious factor to contend with. And on the right, of course, these times of high tide, king tides with a storm surge lead to road closures, as you see here in Cape Elizabeth. We look at the probabilities in our work. So Elliott was about between the 1 and the 5 recurrence interval, not too big a deal. We get a 2-footer every winter from a northeaster. We had one in 2019 that was in the 4% category, surge of about 4 feet. That particular storm, which just seems to me like a few years ago, produced a surge that was the 3rd highest ever in Portland. We were very lucky because it occurred 2 hours after high tide. But if it had been at high tide, we would have had a real serious situation to contend with. And then lastly, on the bottom row, 4.8 feet, which is about my nose level, right, is where the surge would be in a 1 in 100-year chance event, a 1% chance event per year. That is a probability, and it can happen, it has happened. So we look at the probabilities here, and we look at scenarios that we can build from that. So lastly, storm surge matters quite significantly, and particularly so if it comes on a time of a king tide, which we can also think of as maybe a future sea level being up there that much more often. So tides are measured from mean lower low water, 0 here, 11.2 feet would be considered a king tide, 2.9 feet of surge back in the blizzard of 1978 created the 100-year storm here in Maine. That's the storm of record. 14.1 feet at the tide gauge in Maine, okay? We can simulate what else might happen to us. What kind of experience could we have? We could have a 12-foot king tide event with that 3.9-foot surge we had in 2019 in November. If we'd had those two simultaneously, we would have reached a water level of 15.9 feet, significantly above the 14.1. And then lastly, we wondered, what is a superstorm? And since our last assessment and Hurricane Sandy hit New York, we're like, what are we vulnerable to? And we looked at the worst case scenario here as we know it right now, is a 12-footer with that 1 in 100-year storm surge up to my nose level of 16.8 feet. That's more than 2.5 feet above anything we have seen and know of as the worst case storm here in Maine. So we just have to produce this information so that we can begin to consider how to manage it and what to do with it. And then the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Susie here is these are without sea level rise. In our reports, we talk about the probability of going 1 foot rise, causing that king tide event to become many more hours per year that we're up there. So our vulnerability gets higher as we spend more time at those higher water levels. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susie for some other information in the marine realm, both chemical and biological and related to the marine economy. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see so many friendly faces this morning. I don't understand why I'm not seeing that many smiles, though. So I'm going to start with a real quick story. So my son, who's 7, he was up very early this morning, and so I said to him, "Oh, Gavin, maybe you can help me with my slides. I have too many." He said, "Mommy, I don't know what slides are." And then a second later, he was like, "Water slides?" And so in his mind, I couldn't possibly have too many slides. I also think he might think I work at Aquaboggan, which is a water park. And I'm thinking after listening to Ivan and Steve that might not be a bad adaptation strategy, given the heat waves we'll be facing and the the wave action I could prepare in the wave pool. So moving on, I just thought I'd try to lighten the mood a little bit. Diving into the Gulf of Maine, I'm going to orient you here. What we're looking at, I don't have a pointer, so you're seeing Cape Cod there, you're seeing GOM is the Gulf of Maine. This Gulf Stream that we have is that current that's coming up from the north carrying warmer, saltier water. That blue line up there that's coming down, that's the Labrador Current. It's carrying colder, fresher water down from Canada. And then that yellow arrow is showing the northeast channel. That's going to be relevant. So I'm going to talk about how changes in ocean circulation have really led to the warming water that we are seeing here in the Gulf of Maine. So a number of papers over the last 5 to 10 years have demonstrated that this Arctic warming and increasing ice melt from Greenland are contributing to the weakening of something called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, called AMOC for obvious reasons. And this weakening of the AMOC has actually caused the Gulf Stream to shift to the north and cause a retreat of the cold water current known as the Labrador Current. So what has resulted is this warm water entering the northeast channel. This really happened in earnest in 2010, and that has come to be known as the 2010 regime shift, where the rapid warming of the Gulf of Maine really started in earnest, and that will be relevant to the rest of my talk. Since those papers were released, there's been a couple recent scientific papers coming out of different groups in Maine. One is from Barney Balch and his team at Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences. He's analyzed a 20-year data set known as the Gulf of Maine North Atlantic Time Series. And that's essentially a transect that goes from Portland all the way to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. Another paper is from Dave Townsend at the University of Maine and his group. Their group analyzed 19 years of buoy M data, which is the buoy right in the middle of the Gulf of Maine there in Jordan Basin. The Barney Balch paper also shows you some buoy M data in the figure on your right there. Some take-home points from these two papers include, again, abrupt influxes of warm, salty, low-nutrient Gulf Stream water into the interior of the Gulf. More information on this new baseline of warming temperatures and higher salinities that have become established since 2010, and these are really illustrated in that figure to the right. Down below, you can see 2010 is the year where things really shifted in the temperature on the top and the salinity on the bottom. Higher temperatures seen after 2010, higher salinities also seen after 2010. And then Barney's paper highlighted some concerning signs at the base of the marine food web. I won't get into these, but they're very concerning, showing declining phytoplankton primary production in the Gulf of Maine over that 20-year data set. So sure enough, Ivan showed a figure like this. This is not land or air temperature, but rather sea surface temperature in the Gulf of Maine. The black squiggly line is 2023. The orange line is 2022. And it's comparing sea surface temperatures to that average temperature between the 30 years of 1982 to 2011. That's the dashed line. So that's the mean over those 30 years. And you can see the last couple years have been anomalously high. This comes as no surprise. One just kind of interesting data fact that I pulled these data right before, or I was looking at them kind of over that weekend where we had the Hurricane Lee passing through. And so you can see September 15th is Friday before the storm. Temperature actually dropped 5 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of those 2 days, probably from the mixing caused by the wind of that storm. So it's kind of an interesting, fun fact. So unfortunately, these ocean temperatures are will continue to increase over time. This is showing sea surface temperature in the Gulf of Maine going back to 1880 to current day, and then the squiggly lines off to the right showing accelerated rise are projected temperatures out to the year 2100 under 3 different emissions scenarios. If you look at the high emissions scenario out to 2050, down East Maine coastal temperatures would be similar to southern New England temperatures today. And I like to say this sounds nice for swimming, but it's not good for many of our marine species here in the Gulf of Maine. It's changing their distribution and abundance. The most well-known story has to do with the changes in distribution and abundance of the Maine lobster. So the panel on the left here is data from 1972 on scientific tows where they're surveying for lobster biomass. And so you can see kind of Cape Cod jutting out. The reds and the dark oranges are indicative of high biomass, so where more lobsters were caught. You can see that in the 70s, that was largely in southern New England. Fast forward to a few years ago in 2019, the same scientific tows done in the same places showing high biomass of lobsters in down East Maine and further offshore. And I highlight a paper from a number of the scientists that are on the SDS, including some folks in this room. And they're really highlighting how this warming water temperature has actually been a boom for the lobster industry here in Maine. And if you look at pounds landed in millions of pounds, over on the left, the gray bars are millions of lobsters landed over time from 1950 to current day. The black line is the dollar value. You can see there's been a dramatic increase in lobster landings. If you take the peak year in 2016 and compare it to 20 years prior, at 1996, you can see that landings have actually tripled in that 20-year period. You can also see that landings are declining in the last few years. They're still very robust as compared to historical landings. But unfortunately, many of Maine DMR's sublegal lobster surveys are showing concerning trends. Sublegal lobsters are those that are about to be considered keepers, and they are an indication of what future catch may be. This figure is showing two different sublegal lobster surveys, one the trawl survey on top from 2000 to 2022, and then the ventless trap survey on the bottom from 2006 to 2021, showing downturns which could indicate future downturns in the fishery. I mention this because these are scientific data that are being used by fisheries managers to regulate the fishery in the face of a changing climate. Unfortunately, it's not just fisheries that are being impacted by changing ocean conditions. Changing ocean conditions and climate change in general are impacting endangered species globally. Probably closest to home and most well known is the story of how changing ocean conditions are impacting the endangered North Atlantic right whale. So I'm going to summarize using an infographic data coming out of one paper a couple of years ago that describes how climate change is impacting the right whale. The first panel is showing the story kind of pre-Gulf of Maine regime shifts. So from 2000 to 2009, when the Gulf Stream was flowing in its kind of original path prior to the shift, the Gulf of Maine was cooler. There was higher summer food available in the Gulf of Maine in the form of the copepod Calanus finmarchicus, which is the preferred prey for the North Atlantic right whale. We saw more births and fewer deaths of the right whale. Fast forward to 2010, the next decade, 2010 to 2019, the Gulf Stream had shifted. The Gulf of Maine was warmer. There was lower summer food availability in the Gulf of Maine, and we saw right whales shift their foraging activity to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There were fewer births and more deaths during that decade. And this is summarized in a table. Here you can see on the left are the lighter blue are carcasses, the darker blue are births, showing the extinction risk of these whales increase as you had obviously fewer births and more deaths, particularly in the year 2017 when there was unusual mortality event. So just to summarize data coming out of this particular paper, with reduced prey, the right whales began moving beyond their traditional feeding grounds in the Gulf of Maine. By 2015, they were showing up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where protections were not yet in place. There was that 27 unusual mortality event, and with less food, calving rates were declining. Another paper from the same group of whale biologists came out the following year, really telling us that right whales are a cautionary tale for management of a protected species in a changing ocean. And I highlight, this is kind of a data-intensive slide, but I highlight it because it's showing decades worth of visual sighting data. Where the X's are, whales were surveyed, but no whales were found, and where the dots are where whales were found, and this is again from the decade of 2010 to 2018. The panel on the right is showing one of the longest cetacean surveys up in Canada, showing some consistent number of days surveyed from 1980 to 2020, and only until really the last few years, the total sightings of right whales were seen, or rather, right whales were seen in that area, with the sightings really increasing in the last 5 years. So I mention this because a lot of our ability to understand where right whales have been reliant on visual surveys, which are hugely expensive and time intensive, and really should be incorporated with other types of monitoring. And so some good news: last week during Climate Week, the federal government announced $82 million for more research to preserve the endangered right whale, including a lot of money for more modeling and monitoring. Specifically, what I'm most excited about is the push for more acoustic monitoring, as well as a satellite tagging monitoring program. So switching gears just a little bit to another climate stressor we're experiencing here in the Gulf of Maine, ocean acidification. I'm sure you've heard of it. This is a time series, our longest time series from the North Pacific, just showing that as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is the red line, starting in 1958, increases, so does carbon dioxide in the ocean. That's the green line. And when carbon dioxide in the ocean increases, you see pH in the ocean decline, which is the blue line. So with increasing carbon dioxide, you see increasing acidity in the ocean. Unfortunately, this is projected globally to continue to increase as we pollute more. The figure on the right is showing declines in pH under different emissions scenarios. So why do we care about why do we care about ocean acidification so much in the Gulf of Maine? Well, it's well known since 2013 that we have an environmental susceptibility beyond most water bodies on the East Coast, including the Gulf of Mexico, for a number of environmental reasons, including that the Gulf of Maine is cold, and cold water inherently holds more CO2. We've got a lot of cold, fresh water coming in from our many rivers. We've got that fresh, cold current coming down from Canada, carrying a lot of more acidic water into the Gulf of Maine, where it kind of stays put more because of our semi-enclosed shape. So we have very low buffering capacity. On top of that, we have a high reliance on shell-building species. These are the species that are going to be most impacted by ocean acidification. So not just lobster, but bivalves like soft-shell clams, scallops, mussels, hard clams, etc. In fact, 75% of our fisheries by landings value are shell-building species. So the ocean, fortunately, is also being looked to for climate solutions. I mention this because it's a really burgeoning area of science that we should be aware of here in the Gulf of Maine, and it's something called marine carbon dioxide removal. So while it's extremely important that we continue to reduce our emissions, some scientists think that we should also be removing the legacy emissions that we have already polluted, both in the air and also in the ocean. And this is something called marine carbon dioxide removal. It ranges from a bunch of different strategies, all the way from restoring blue carbon ecosystems to technologies like direct carbon dioxide removal, to ocean alkalinity enhancement, and even to terrestrial biomass dumping. I mention it because it's relevant to the Gulf of Maine. NOAA just administered $24 million for 17 projects that advance marine carbon dioxide removal, 7 of which were in Woods Hole, and 1 of which, as I understand, will be doing field testing in the Gulf of Maine. So related to blue carbon, you may have seen the Portland Press Herald article that came out last week around Maine being one of the first states to consider the potential seaweed has to store carbon when it breaks apart and falls to the ocean floor. So looking into the carbon sequestration potential of seaweeds and potentially including that in our state's carbon budget. Around the same time, an opinion paper just came out. Nicole Price, one of the members of the STS, is on the paper. It's a bunch of scientists looking into the validity of using seaweed as a blue carbon ecosystem. Is the science there? Could those carbon offset credits be truly verified? But whether or not that kind of science catches up and it ends up coming to fruition that it's a possibility, there are a ton of possibilities for advances in climate services of farmed seaweeds. So this is exciting for Maine because we've shown that we are very good at growing seaweed, and it has a number of applications that can replace higher products with larger carbon footprints. This comes from a recent paper that was published showing how farmed seaweeds can actually ladder up to the United Nations Sustainability Development Goal of climate action. So lots of ecosystem services provided by seaweeds. They can be used not just for food, so replacing higher carbon food. They can be used to replace plastics. They can be used to replace fuels. There's lots of research happening here in Maine to have seaweeds be food additives for livestock that produce methane burps that are a huge contributor of methane worldwide. So lots of excitement globally and here in Maine around the climate services of seaweeds. So lastly, I'm actually going to end with a figure from the behavioral psychology literature. As Ivan and Steve mentioned, we are just 3 members of the STS. This is not a complete rundown of everything that we'll be covering. Importantly, we did not touch at all on the human dimension of climate change. We now have many social scientist perspectives on the scientific and technical subcommittee. And importantly, we understand that while providing the data and the facts are extremely important to set the stage for climate action, these are not the types of interventions that motivate people to change behavior. If you look at the literature, it's actually social comparison, and that's where you all come in. We are a collective, and we are here today to share our stories of sustainability successes. And I think the next talk about the importance of including youth in climate action will really highlight that. So thank you.
All right, I want to give a huge thank you to our 3 Science and Technical Subcommittee co-chairs. They are doing a lot of heavy lifting on all of our behalf, and they are bright and optimistic people, despite what they've told us. So we appreciate you telling us the truth, so thanks again to them. All right, so we are going to, I'm going to invite up here Amara Afiji of Bangor, Maine. She is our Youth Climate Council representative. She is an award-winning climate justice leader. She has won both the National Geographic Young Explorer and Brower Youth Award. She goes to school full-time and also serves as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Maine Environmental Education Association. She helped organize the first ever Climate Education Summit, and in 2021, Amara mobilized a youth-led movement that successfully passed legislation that secured $2 million for climate education for Maine schools through the state budget process. And for all those legislators know, that is a lot of work, huge accomplishment. Amara continues to lead on policy solutions focused on ensuring equitable access to the outdoors and climate education for all youth. We are thrilled to have her join the Climate Council and have her say a few words and then introduce some students and teachers working on climate issues in Jay, Maine. So welcome, Amara.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really grateful and honored to begin my tenure as the recently appointed youth representative to the Maine Climate Council and for an opportunity to share what I envision for myself in this role. I'm even more grateful for Anya Wright, who did an incredible job. Yes, applause for Anya. Anya did a really incredible job as the first Climate Council youth rep, and she did such phenomenal work in shaping a role that is easier to step into. And although I still have big shoes to fill, I feel really privileged to have thousands of Maine youth equally committed to Maine's environment, and I believe that they share this role with me. As youth representative, I'm most excited to be in community with the council, youth advocates, and other diverse populations across the state. When addressing the climate crisis, I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed at the magnitude and immediacy of the issue, but rooting myself in community has kept me inspired and motivated to work towards solution generation. This is because building community is foundational to building a better world. As a council, we all bring unique perspectives that span many sectors, generations, and lived experiences. I'm excited to contribute to and learn from this community as we work on one of the world's most immediate concerns. As an environmental educator, I am most excited to see what more robust climate education recommendations can look like. Youth across the state continue to express a need for interdisciplinary climate education to equip them with the skills and knowledge to tackle this issue. My first experience with the Climate Council over 3 years ago was inspired by the same desire for a climate education. An intergenerational working group and I proposed recommendations around climate education to the Climate Council. We were so thrilled when these recommendations made it into the 4-year climate action plan, Maine, Won't, Wait. And last year, these recommendations served as the impetus for a bill passed in the Maine legislature, which secured over $2 million in an investment for climate education. Thank you. There's currently actually a request for proposals out for school districts to be able to access these funds that's going to be available through November. And so folks should check out the Department of Education's website and share these opportunities with schools to take hold of this opportunity. LD 1902 is just one example of the importance of our work as a council over the next year. The 4-year plan that we will work on will turn into bold policies, scalable programs, and outlined solutions. As a council, we are tasked with setting recommendations that inspire change and build the world we envision. Therefore, I am so grateful to be doing this work in community. As we cross-pollinate ideas, we can ensure that diverse populations across the state are included so that everyone has a piece of their vision included in the world that we're building. Thank you. And so now I think I have the privilege, if this green button works, wrong green button, okay, to introduce the other youth representatives to the Climate Council. And so if the youth reps could please stand up and be recognized for their work. I can probably speak for the rest of the council in saying we're really excited to work with you over the next year. And speaking about climate education in action, shortly we'll be hearing from the Spruce Mountain High School Envirothon team and their teachers. For those unfamiliar with Envirothon, it's a national environmental competition. After winning the state competition, the team competed admirably at the international competition. And this was all the while grappling with climate concerns in their home community of Jay. Here is a short video highlighting their experiences.
I like to say, even if you don't believe in climate change, climate's changing.
Teachable moments most happen when kids take what they're learning and they can almost immediately apply it to their own lives. Morning, guys.
It doesn't matter how big your school is. Kids with a passion can do anything.
Climate change is causing increases in the frequency.
So Envirothon is the largest environmental competition in the world.
We're presented with a current issue that we make a problem scenario to compete at the regional and then state level.
We've won Maine State Envirothons. It's actually 12 out of the last 15 years.
Rob Taylor has his own dynasty.
100 years story. We met with the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. I'm preparing the kids to go attend the International Envirothon and compete with other teams from around the world.
We were talking about literally like armored ditches, things like these, and then all of a sudden...
the storm hits.
It happened on my birthday.
We've got at least a half a foot of rain in a matter of hours.
This woman comes in and she's like, the streets are washing out.
The volume of water was amazing.
I looked out and there's firefighters in the road flashing lights.
People then posting roads were gone. People's lawns were covered in water.
7 or 8 major roads in our town were just wiped out.
Every Department of Transportation across the country that I know considers climate risk to be one of their biggest threats to their infrastructure system.
Drive by the areas that were affected and you see what the effects of our changing climate is.
Having a storm like this affect us on a personal level really opens your eyes. This is happening, and these are things that you can do to help this. These are things that are going to be done to help this.
And it's a risk to all communities. Every community we have, climate change is going to be a reality, and we're going to see its effects. They're saying that they did close to $8 million in damage.
What does keep me up at night are these rain events where we could lose a culvert, someone doesn't understand that there's water in the road, they try to drive over it, and there's nothing there.
There's a closed road sign, and people were going down there anyways.
I think we have to shift our emphasis to what are the solutions?
Climate change is a two-pronged approach. You need to have mitigation and adaptation, or resilience.
I think their voices matter. They need to understand that people like myself do listen to them.
So why don't you grab your stuff?
We eventually are going to be the ones making decisions and making solutions or solving problems in our world.
When people take action, we can make a difference. And I think kids are seeing that.
I think they'll remember this experience the rest of their lives and take it with them and do better things because of it.
Awesome. Well, let's give another warm Climate Council welcome to the Spruce Mountain Environmental team, and welcome to the stage.
I want to thank everybody for inviting us to speak today, and thank you, Amar, for all the work that you've been doing with youth. I've been asked to talk about the challenges in preparing future leaders in our next generation to deal with climate change. And if you're a teacher in the state of Maine, when you go to teach any topic, you start by going to our state standards. And in the Maine science and technology standards, which are based on the next generation science standards that have been adopted by more than half of the states in the US, we have a standard that says, use a model to describe how variations in the flow of energy into and out of Earth's systems result in climate change. That's the goal. And it's a real challenge. You have a problem caused by invisible gases in the atmosphere that actually cause these little tiny changes in temperature. And those big little tiny changes have big effects. And getting kids to understand this is a truly, truly challenging thing to do. It's also an existential problem. We look at all the data that we just saw. Climate change can be very, very anxiety-inducing for our students. They need to see hope in their future. They need to see that they can make a difference. And one of the good news is that our next generation cares. We have bright young people. We have people that really want to make a difference. There's a lot of research out there that says that our younger people care about the environment more than older generations. And that's really, really good news. We also have another standard in Maine. It's actually one of our engineering standards in the Maine Science and Technology Standards. And it says that students should be able to design a solution to complex real-world problems by breaking them down into smaller, more manageable problems that can be solved through engineering. And I guess what I'm proposing here is we should have a unified effort, and we should teach these two standards together. We teach kids what the problems are, why they exist, what's the science behind climate change, but we also need to get them to be looking at the solutions. I had a student who graduated back in 2018, and he is now a climate change scientist for one of our major oil companies. And he met with the kids as we were preparing to go to the international competition last summer. And he told us that climate change is not a science problem. It's an economic problem. We know what to do. We know what the answers are. We have the science and technology to do it. Do we have the will to do it? And that sentiment, I think, is the one that young people need to hear, and they need to see that, that there is hope in the future. So when we approach climate change education, we really need to take that point of view that we can make a difference. That statistic I heard earlier that the 2019 GHG levels were less than the 1990 GHG levels, things like that give me hope. And I'm going to pass it on to the kids now. So this is Owen Schwab.
Hi. As he said, I'm Owen Schwab. I'm currently at the University of Maine, Orono. I graduated last year and was on the Envirothon. Thanks again for having us. Although I was not there in person to witness the flooding, it still had an impact. I live in nearby Livermore Falls, just a few minutes away from where all the flooding happened. And although my house and myself were left undamaged, I was lucky. Several of my friends witnessed it firsthand, and for example, one of them had 2 inches of water in his bedroom. Many of the roads, like Route 133, were out of service, and getting around was a lot harder. It was suddenly clear, climate change isn't happening around us, it's happening to us. And it's going to get someone hurt if we're not careful. Not someone far away on the news, but in our lives. And when I put it that way, it seems kind of scary, but that's not the effect that it had on me. It didn't inspire me to be afraid, it inspired me to problem solve. I was thinking about this. It's a local problem that was made very clear very suddenly. And despite the damage it caused, this is an opportunity. We now know exactly what happens when you get storms like this, and we can be more prepared for the next time. And there's more armored ditches in Jay now after this, so we're already starting to change. Now I see these are problems that I can help solve, and this is the kind of difference I can make.
It's nice to see all your bright and shining faces. I'm Dan Wilson. I'm also up at Orono for environmental science. I was asked what I've learned through Envirothon that might help myself or my community to prepare or respond for future climate events. And through Envirothon, I've learned a few things. First, climate change is happening now. We can't stop it anymore, making it so much more important that we adapt effectively to it. Second, it's important that all the voices are heard in making and reorganizing a climate action plan, especially those in the indigenous peoples' tribes. They have so much knowledge in their environment and a much higher stake in the issue than most of us do. And third, adapting to a changing climate is an environmental issue, but it is much more an economic one. If we want to have effective plans in reducing our losses and maximizing our safety, it's important that there are incentives for companies and common people alike to reduce their carbon footprint, fireproof their homes and offices, and be more aware of insect-borne illnesses that will become more and more common. We'd like to think that just telling people what they can do to help would work, but for many it takes more than just a conscience. Also, between increased winter tick and lots of warming, our beloved moose are shifting their range and likely won't be here much longer. The current state of the future looks bleak, but we're all here to do something about that.
Hi everyone, I'm Leah Burgess and I'm a senior at Spruce Mountain High School, and I was on the team with these guys last year when we competed internationally. And I was asked how I got into studying the environment and climate, and I think an easy answer to that is I'm a Mainer from the start, and I grew up in rural Maine around nature and the environment. When I step outside my door, I am in nature. When I go to practice in the afternoon, I'm in nature, right next to the forest sides. The environment around me also is a safe space. I find it very important. It's a place I can go and not be judged, and I can just free think and do anything I need to do away from people. And when you're a little girl and you're noticing, oh, we didn't get as much snow, I wasn't able to build as many snowmen, you wonder and you want to dive deeper. And like Owen said, you want to problem solve. And Envirothon is the perfect place to find that place to problem solve and protect this place, this safe space that I love so much.
Hello, my name is Brendan Vayu, and I'm a senior at Spruce Mountain High School. And I was asked about my thoughts on engaging youth on this issue. I think engaging the youth is one of the most important actions that needs to be taken when considering mitigation strategies for tackling climate change. I would say to other young people that our future is in our hands. Let's not dwell on the past or the actions of past generations, but take the initiative to adapt and mitigate the effects of our changing climate. We can be the generation to change the trajectory of our planet's future and provide a safe environment for our children and grandchildren. The most effective way for youth to become involved in their communities is to question their leaders, ask what is currently being done, and continue to drive innovation in your communities.
Thank you very much.
Incredible team, thank you, and thank you, Amara. We're so excited to work with you and many youth around the state as we kick off this plan. We are running slightly behind, and we have 2 more great things coming up, 3 more great things coming up before lunch. So I'm gonna give you a 5-minute break, and I mean a real 5 minutes. So everyone run to the bathroom and then run back. We're gonna hear from Commissioner Heather Johnson talking about the economy and climate, what could be more important. So 5 minutes, come back.
All right. It is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Commissioner Heather Johnson from the Department of Economic and Community Development, and she is going to be talking to you about how climate solutions are creating economic and workforce opportunities in Maine.
Big green button, big green button. Thank you. Good morning. How are you? Thank you. It's always, it's always interesting when you come into these sessions, right? I think it's masterful planning on Melanie and Hannah's part, right? You go into the really hard science of it, and it's complicated, and it feels, at least to me, at times overwhelming, right? The charge at hand of what it looks like. But then you bring up the students from Spruce Mountain and UMaine, and you think, okay, nope, it's okay, right? There are people that are engaged. There is a passion that we all share, but also that Maine youth shares and youth around the world shares. And so there is real hope and optimism there. So anyway, thank you all for being here and for telling your story. And if you weren't watching, the placement in the global challenge, I think is fascinating. That was, great. We don't send a lot of kids to global contests and have them, not kids, students, young people, and have them really excel like that. So great work. Okay, on to what I'm supposed to be here to talk about. I wanted to start to set the stage a little bit. Like, what do you think about when you think about Maine's economy? Everybody's version is a little different, right? Is it general stores? Is it young entrepreneurs looking at new ways to meet the global demand for protein? Is it old abandoned warehouses that might be in your neighborhood that you drive by every day and you think, my great-grandfather worked there, but nobody's working there right now? These are some of the best buildings we have, though, if you think about long-term opportunity. Is it Is it retrofitting? Is it new? Is it ag? Is it life sciences? Right? I would say the advantage here is it's all of those things. And that's one of the advantages that Maine has. We have real strength in some of our heritage industries, but we also have opportunities in new, innovative ways of thinking. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today and why that convergence is so important as we think about global solutions for climate change. This is my favorite slide, so I put this in every presentation. Bear with me for 2 seconds. If you think about Maine's economy, everybody has a different perspective of what it looks like to them. I will set the stage with some data, though. Maine's economy has grown 11th fastest in the country since 2019. 11th fastest. That's kind of unheard of for us. We're not 11th largest, right? Our economy is never going to be as big as California, New York, and some of the other really large states. But our ability to control what we can control, which is sustainable, diverse growth, is really important. And so we're really proud of this. If you could overlay greenhouse gas emissions, which we tried to do, frankly, yesterday, but the data sets weren't quite the right timing matches up. While the economic curve is going this way, the greenhouse gas emission is actually going this way. So again, really clear that you can do both of these things at the same time. And in some ways, our economy is growing in part because of our ability to generate global solutions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in the next few minutes. So to take a step back, in 2019, when the governor came into office, it was clear that there was no economic plan for our state. And that created a number of challenges. If you think about Maine and its ability for communities, businesses, and nonprofits to work together, without a roadmap and a plan, it's really hard to work together. Everybody's got their own priorities. Everybody's interested in helping each other. But without a plan, there isn't kind of a path forward. My second or third day in this role, an entrepreneur came up to me and he said, I moved to Maine because one of the things I like about Maine is you're only a couple of calls from anybody and everyone will sit down and have a cup of coffee with you. They'll try to help. They'll introduce you to other people. They might not invest in you, which much to his chagrin, but they will try to help and they will be involved. And so as we thought about that and what that meant for our economy, we realized we needed to have a framework to move forward from, and we needed to have a framework to be accountable to. So what are some clear goals that we needed to work toward? And are those goals things that we can all rally around and make progress toward? And you can see in 2019, there was clear call out for the need for climate action as part of the economic plan. And I think as we continue to see these plans refresh themselves now, I know the climate plan obviously is what we're all here to talk about. The strategic plan for the economy, we're actually doing the same, kind of some similar work on, which is refreshing the project suites as things get completed. We have outcomes, we can continue to move forward. These plans are important, and it's important for them to have clear options for opportunity to work together. And so, we appreciate the opportunity to talk today a little bit and to sit on the Climate Council and have those ways to be able to move back and forth. I would say if you think about the strategic plan, two big things are innovation and workforce, or people, and talent. Those are only more important today than they were in 2019 and will continue to be more important to both our economic goals and our climate goals as we move forward. So as you think about one of the biggest opportunities being talent and people, a couple of stage setting things. Again, I think one of the places where the economy and the climate work well together is if we set our actions based on data, it's much easier to move forward. And so as you think about this, we have more people working today in Maine's economy than we've ever had. And so that's a really important data point. I would say there aren't enough people working today in Maine's economy as well. And so both of those things are true. We need more people. We need more people to find their path into Maine's economy. If you look at prime working age, our workforce participation rate in what you would consider prime working age are actually higher than the national averages. So really what we're seeing are people that are in prime working age are working, and they are contributing in one sector or another. What I will say is because of our aging demographic, we need more people. And so we need all of the people that sit at tables like this right before me to join Maine's economy, and then we need them to bring in their friends. And we need to be able to bring in people into Maine's economy. We've seen an immigration in the last 3 years. Some of that is based on the work that the people in this room are doing, right? The vision for climate and the vision for innovation in climate science is something that is very attractive to people as they are looking to live wherever they choose. And so that's a big part of why we're seeing this. The value and the health of our rural economies is also a key part of this. We're seeing people not just move into the southern parts of the state, but move into some of our rural communities as well. So again, natural resources are really driving some of our opportunity. So just to stage set, the 3 big goals of the strategic plan are to grow wages by 10%. Obviously, we're above that now. If you adjust wage growth for inflation, we're still above the inflationary impacts that we've seen over the last few years, but not by much. So the good news is wages are outpacing inflation. I would say the other side of that coin is inflation is sapping out the disposable income elements of that. So we are able to hold our ground, but people aren't necessarily making the wage growth when we set this goal. Increased productivity. This is an important one as we think about the intersection of climate and the economy. The more productive we can be per worker, the better our opportunities become. And so this productivity goal is really driven on innovation, and that will be an important part of how we all work together. And I just talked a little bit about this attract the talent pool. So in 2019, the number was 75,000 people we needed to attract. I think it depends on who you ask today. The number's probably larger than that. That came from projections of how many people would be retiring and entering the workforce kind of in our natural birth and death rate ages. We have just under 12,000 students every year that graduate from high school in Maine. So that will, if you do the math against the number of people that are retiring, you can certainly see that there's a delta there. So why does that matter to this room? I think if you think about where our opportunities are in Maine's economy, they're really about thinking about what we've been great at, right? We call them heritage industries over the course of time, what we have legacy and knowledge and expertise in, but also thinking about how do we innovate in those spaces to become the global solution. So you can look at each of these bubbles and think about, okay, in clean energy, what are we testing? What are we trying? What are we learning? So think, one great example there is the work that ORPC is doing in Millinocket. They're testing river tides to see, can they generate renewable energy on inshore opportunities as well? And can that create behind the grid micropower for manufacturing facilities? And so now we have companies that care a lot, right, about their climate impact, saying, if I can get renewable energy inland, is that an opportunity for me? And so we have people evaluating sites in Millinocket in part because of our ability to do this. And so what that also attracts, obviously, are people who care a lot about the climate. And so the innovation and the manufacturing work that they're bringing is also very, I would say, climate conscious. And so, again, we will create a cycle there on its own. So that's just one example. I think in clean energy, there's probably a lot of them, and Dan could do a much better job than I can of telling those stories, but we're seeing opportunity there to invest. We're seeing that technology being able to span out into other states as well. Obviously, there are some big opportunities there too that are still being worked through, where we have kind of, at the university particularly, created kind of the thought leadership. Now the question is, how does the commercialization work? And if we can be the thought leaders, can we also be the commercial leaders so that we can, as the global climate solution leader in thought, can we also then take advantage of that so that means people can see both climate outcomes and commercialized outcomes there as well? As you think about bio-based alternatives, we've had a lot of these recently, which is really exciting. And I think part of that is because the forest product sector was kind of driven into some challenges, right? As paper became the demand for paper became less and less, there were some clear opportunities to move into new sectors. So thinking about new building products, thinking about packaging products. And so there's been a lot of work done there. Many of you were at the Timber HP launch, which allows us to retrofit an old mill. One of the earlier slides that you all didn't see was a headline saying UPM closes Madison facility. That was a really hard moment in kind of a small rural town's life, right? If you have to be there in those moments, I will tell you, you never want to do that again. You sit and you talk to people who their whole life has been wrapped up in the opportunity that they had at the mill, and they then have to reset their universe. The ability to go back and repurpose this mill and open the doors to some of those folks that were negatively impacted in that process, but now are back there and working. I don't know, it doesn't get better than that in my universe, because they are working at something that will, help sequester carbon, help revitalize that town. Capital begets capital. People are now building new housing there. Restaurants are open. It's a lot of things. And young people are saying, wait a minute, there's hope and opportunity for me here. I can go do other things if I want, but I don't have to go. And so, this is a place where we're seeing these opportunities to make big climate shifts, but also to really revitalize some of these rural communities. And so Timber HP is who I've been talking about there. They're very focused on wood-based insulation, wood fiber insulation, and they're actually shipping product now. So it went from, they had a good idea and they had a concept, to a lot of research in Europe, to finding a mill that they could retrofit, and now shipping and selling products. So there's a lot of work still to be done. It's not I would say it's early in their life cycle. Early stage companies need help. They need all of us to continue to help them. But they're a great example. Tan bark is another, as you think about shifting away from plastics and fossil fuels and packaging into other choices. These are opportunities for Maine to lead. There is no other wood fiber insulation manufacturing in the US. They do it in Europe, they do it other places, but there's nobody else doing it right now in Maine. From a packaging perspective, there's no bigger consumer market than our one-day drive, right? If you think Boston, New York, depending on how you drive, DC, Chicago, for me. But they tell me Chicago, I can't keep putting in my loop. But if you think about the consumable universe there, it opens the door for us to provide packaging solutions to go to those markets. And again, in a way that helps the entire supply chain to strengthen them and keep that running. If you think over in food systems, there was quite a bit of talk earlier this morning about marine food. You saw that, some discussion about seaweed and kelp. And again, multiple options there to think about off-season revenue generators, to think about supporting some of our coastal communities. I would say even opportunities like Springworks in Lisbon. Some of you have probably been there, but they are using hydroponic technology that has very limited impact climate-wise, but can grow local produce here in Maine and supply, again, the Northeast corridor where we consume an awful lot of that work. So if you're at your local grocery store and they have Springworks, I would say buy it. It's local, right? We talk about kind of these small, in the economy, we talk about small steps, right? You're not going to go from here to here without taking some of the steps in the middle. And so what we tend to try to do is say, how do we keep moving forward? How do we retrofit old facilities? How do we improve productivity through innovation? How do we find solutions through innovation and through technology and through great talent to be able to deliver these global solutions in a way that continues to help Maine's economy strengthen and diversify, continues to help Maine communities see paths forward and find opportunity. When we first were here in 2019, I was having a lot of discussions with rural communities about their concerns about young people leaving, about their ability to maintain their schools and their hospitals. Now the discussions are different challenges, but we don't have enough sewer and water. We don't have enough chairs in our schools. We don't have enough books. Well, I would much rather talk about how we get more books into schools than to talk about what happens if there isn't a school. And so while they aren't without challenges, these steps are really important steps. And just like in climate, we can all take steps every day to improve what we do. I would say from an economic perspective, we can find that intersection of climate and economy by thinking very locally about what we do, how we do it, how we support local businesses, and particularly how we support local businesses in some of these arenas. So opportunities, emerging industries, we've talked a lot about that. I would say this tends to happen in a state like Maine in small entrepreneurial ways. We have companies that test and try product and they adjust, and they test and try product and they adjust, and they drive innovation. I think you'll see this happen in increments, right? It's not going to be, we're here today and we're over here tomorrow. Again, these companies, they emerge. We have infrastructure actually that is available to help companies like that. So if you know of companies that are driving innovation in climate solutions, let us know. We're happy to try to partner them up with investors and other support mechanisms, because there were big gaps in the investment pipeline for high-risk companies that are driving, that have the potential, right, to drive long-term global change. But it's hard to get from startup to long-term global change. And so part of what we can do is try to help remove some of those barriers, and we look forward to doing that with companies. We do have some new resources. Hannah talked earlier about some of the federal funding resources that are available. We also have a new business incentive. Thank you, Representative Collmore. Saw you earlier. And the other legislators that helped get that bill through last session. It modernizes an incentive program that allows organizations to meet their needs here locally in Maine. It allows us to be competitive and have offers for people to make capital investments in their local communities and modernize and upgrade so that they can both be climate responsible, efficient, and profitable, so that they can stay here for the long haul. It also allows them to train employees, because most of this work isn't work that people necessarily know how to do, right? You got to start somewhere, and we need to continue to be training folks. You know, there's a clean energy workforce goal of 30,000 people. We're already halfway there, right? We've opened the door. We've said, right, here's the market. There's going to be market demand here for the future. And then we offered free community college that said, here are the training programs that you need to do that work. And so, you know, Maine youth have just responded and said, great, that's work we're interested in. You've removed the barrier to get these credentials. And so already we're halfway to our goal. I would say also people are coming in from other states to meet that goal too, which is a great combination. But the training programs, we don't talk a ton about that, but in workforce, there are a lot of training programs now. There is hope, and there are barriers removed for a lot of people to kind of join the workforce and to be able to have the opportunity to get a credential of value, which allows them to join the workforce wherever they want, right? Maine's workforce is a big continuum. There's no bad spot to start, is my view. Start somewhere, and then part of our job is to continue to remove barriers as people want to make changes and continue to grow. And I talked a little bit about the concurrent planning. I do think we have a real opportunity that we kind of tripped into maybe in the first round of the strategic plan, but we're going to be a lot more diligent and kind of intentional about in the second iteration of our plans, the collective plans, to think about these global intersections. I'm glad they were captured in both of the plans originally, and again, that was a natural evolution. I think this time we have a real opportunity to prioritize project streams that work together and leverage innovation in heritage industries, which helps everyone in that sector, right? If you think about a logger. Loggers need new markets, right? Loggers might used to have brought all of their product to a paper mill. Our ability to open new markets for them not only helps the people creating the global solution, right, with packaging, say molded fiber packaging, but all the way down the stream to the logger to have new outputs. So this innovation in these heritage industries are critical to our ability to succeed long term, and so that's why this concurrent planning is so important.
Welcome to our panel, and we're going to start things off with folks introducing themselves and giving a little bit of information about the work they're doing, and then we'll get into some meatier questions. So I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves and to address a few things for the audience here. So, what is the challenge or vulnerability in your community or industry that your work addresses? What are you doing? And what does success look like? And I'm happy to refresh that as we go. I know that's a lot to take in. So we'll start here with Bill, move on to Jasmine, and then Bob and Bridget. So Bill, let's kick it off with you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bryant. I'm Bill Kitchen. I'm the town manager of Machias, which is the shire town and county seat of Washington County. I came to Maine 12 years ago to live alone in a lighthouse for a year, which I did. And in the process, I fell in love with the geography, the culture, and the people of the Bold Coast, and way down east, as it is increasingly known. And I decided to stay. Before that, I spent the majority of my career in New York City as an account and brand strategist. I continued to do that work in Maine and became involved in the town, some committees, economic development, and was on the select board. And then 2.5 years ago, we found ourselves without a town manager, and I was asked. So first, let me explain where we are and what Machias' role is, and then I'll explain our challenges and the many forces that we have at work here, and then what we're doing and what success looks like. First, it's important to understand where Machias is and what our role is. We're on the coast. In fact, we're the last county on the entire East Coast. We're twice the size of Rhode Island, with a population of only 31,000 people. It is rural. And Machias is the county seat and the service center community. We have a courthouse, hospital, sheriff's office, University of Maine at Machias, a ton of nonprofits, numerous corporate headquarters, including Maine Wild, Bar Harbor Foods, and Machias Savings Bank. We also have an airport, a police department, a fire department, and an ambulance service. But we're small. We've got 15 square miles, with more than half of it taken up by non- or limited tax-paying entities, all of which adds up to a tax-based challenge, especially for the service center of Washington County. It's important to know, though, that we're also enjoying a great reimagination and vitalization, probably unlike we've seen in 40 years. We are on fire by many metrics, from population growth to housing development, to new businesses, to expanded and improved services and infrastructure. Our greatest challenge right now is how do we grow sustainably and responsibly while navigating the changes to the natural forces that we in this town face, in addition to the others. So, on a macro level, this is what we're dealing with. If you look at the slide, Route 1 is the white line that runs down through the town, okay? And we've got a bunch of different things going on here. We have the last mile of the 60-plus mile Machias River, which comes down into Bad Little Falls and then drops into the Machias Bay, which is obviously tidal. We have Middle River coming down to the dike, and that too comes into the Machias Bay. And then we have massive amounts of stormwater that come from the upper downtown commercial area and the historic residential area. All of this goes into the Machias Bay. And this also includes a gravity-fed wastewater treatment plant, which floods regularly. And then there's the Machias Bay, which twice a day obviously goes in and out. So as you can see, this is a pretty busy area with a lot of different water sources doing different things. And to make it more complicated, their behavior is changing, and they're doing different things this year that they didn't do last year. So, on top of that, we've got changing weather, right? And you can ask anyone who's in public works or landscaping or building or fishing or plowing. The weather is different. Our winters are different. We go through a freeze, thaw, repeat, freeze, thaw, repeat. We have extreme and frequent rain events and microstorms throughout the spring and summer. These changes are expensive. They break equipment. They have ripple effects, and they require new ways of doing things. So we've done the basic green stuff, right? We've replaced street lamp bulbs and public building bulbs and added heat pumps and hybrid vehicles and solar farms and EV chargers and recycling and transfer station initiatives, right? We now replace culverts with bigger culverts every time. We put more into equipment repair and replacement budgets. We plan for more man-hours. We plan for more salt and sand. And we look for opportunities to engage the public, and we look for and work with grant money. And a huge thanks to DEP, MEMA, SCEC, and GoPev. So on a macro level, we've got these huge projects going on, right? So if you, again, look at the slide, so that yellow line is the flood wall. It runs from the dike all the way up one side of the river to Bad Little Falls. Opposite that, and to counteract this flood wall, will be a living shoreline, because you can't do one side without doing the other side, right? Then if you look up towards the purple spot, that is a salt marsh restoration, which we are doing along the Sunrise Trail. Then we've got the reconstruction, the red line is the reconstruction of the 300-foot dike and causeway. And as you can see there, the dike and the causeway, along with the flood wall, actually have to line up. So everybody has to be on the same page, right? And then on the opposite side, the non-river side of that orange, we are looking at an underground stormwater storage and mitigation system that will hold millions of gallons underground indefinitely until the bay goes down and the duckbills open, maybe a week later in a big storm, and then they empty. And in fact, we've used our GoPIF funding in particular to come in and work with, we've got these 5 different projects going on, and they are we brought in an entity that will coordinate, share resources, share knowledge, and most importantly, share assumptions, right? So that we're all on the same page. So what does success look like? And I'll give us 5 quick things. Successfully planning for a hurricane. So we had the good fortune of 48 hours out being told that it was probable that we would be a direct hit. And that made everybody pay attention. And we went into full planning mode, from shelters to transportation, and this thing came off without a hitch. We have never done this. So that's what success looks like. A tide gauge on the town dock and an art installation that references wild blueberries, honeybees, and a changing climate. Why is that successful? Because these are conversation starters. These are what keeps things top of mind. These are visuals. This is part of our optics strategy. Success looks like fewer overflows that result in clam flat closures. Success looks like building a flood wall and a stormwater system that takes 24 businesses out of the floodplain. And lastly, I think success looks like this. This is amazing. This is a great, great room and an incredible collection of people doing great things. So, thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you so much for that. Jasmine, what are you working on?
Hello. Oh, okay. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak at this event. My name is Jasmine Lamb. I'm a PhD student at the University of Maine in the Environmental and Ecological Sciences program, and I'm also a member of the Passamaquoddy tribe at Pleasant Point. I founded the Zabaigue Resilience Committee in August of 2022 thanks to funding from the State of Maine's Community Resilience Partnership, and since then we've been pursuing projects relating to climate change adaptation, energy conservation, and sustainable energy generation. It's important to acknowledge that the degradation of the environment in Maine began when our land was stolen by the state of Maine and the state's refusal to recognize Wabanaki tribe sovereignty and allow the tribes to control their own natural resources has resulted in death and disease in Wabanaki communities. So we are not only fighting the effects of climate change, but also the effects of colonization. I could talk all day about the challenges that climate change poses for the Pleasant Point community, but I will try to keep it short. So due to Pleasant Point being a coastal community surrounded by ocean on all sides, the infrastructure and homes are vulnerable to the rising sea levels, which we aim to address with our Chebeskyug Marsh Restoration Grant, partially address it with that grant given future funding. So the community also faces threats to traditional ways of subsistence. Some of these threats include the contamination of wild game and aquatic species, for example, PFAS. So sometimes rendering these fish and wildlife unsafe for human consumption. And these threats also negatively affect the livelihood of tribal members who are already economically disenfranchised. So many tribal members rely on these species to make a living, and the effects of climate change are felt by seasonal workers who rake blueberries, fish for elvers and other aquatic wildlife, and go clamming. And also the brown ash tree, a culturally important species used for basket making, also faces the challenge of the emerald ash borer, which is rapidly killing trees, and that also affects the economic whatever of for Passamaquoddy people. So to us at the Zabai Resilience Committee, success looks like environmental and energy justice. And what we are doing to facilitate this is undertaking projects that encourage the conservation of energy, such as through our window insert build, which we organize through the nonprofit organization Window Dressers. We are planning a second window insert build for 2024 in collaboration with the Passamaquoddy tribe at Indian Township. And that would also include more weatherization in the form of insulation for homes also. And we're also currently in the planning stages of a community-owned co-op solar project with the help of A Climate to Thrive. And that will assist in the transition away from oil and towards more sustainable sources of energy generation. And and we're also exploring other projects that will enhance the tribe's resilience to power outage and other projects relating to climate change adaptation, energy conservation, and sustainable energy generation. And we're kind of using the window insert build as our first jumping off point into getting into more of these projects since we are like only 1 year old. So while the challenges of climate change and colonization are innumerable, we have a team of motivated Passamaquoddy citizens who are working towards a more sustainable future and a healthier environment for future generations. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here and the support that the committee has received from the state and all of our partnering organizations, and also all of the work that's being done by everyone in the room to address climate change. That's it.
I think I'm at the point in my life and career where I see young Wabanaki people stepping into their power, and it fills me with pride and joy. Great job, Jasmine. Bob.
Good morning, or is it almost afternoon now? My name is Bob Baines. I'm a commercial fisherman from Spruce Head. Spruce Head is about 7 miles south of Rockland. I've been a lobster fisherman and a scallop fisherman for over 45 years. I am a longtime board member of the Maine Lobstermen's Association, and I have now newly been appointed to the Climate Council. And also, this is what I'm going to talk about today, I'm a kelp farmer. Being a lifelong lobsterman, I have witnessed the significant changes in the industry, from a 30 million pound fishery to a 100 million pound plus fishery. The fishermen on the coast of Maine are totally dependent on lobster, and that's scary. The fishery has some very real challenges: warming waters, sea level rise, whale rules, offshore wind, and a host of others. But we persevere as generations before us have. Our fishery is sustainable, but rapidly changing. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Kelp farming. You've heard it mentioned a couple times already this morning. Kelp farming is in its infancy and has the potential to become a significant resource that can be grown and harvested up and down the coast. I was once asked in an interview if I considered myself a fisherman or a farmer. I very quickly said I was a fisherman, but in reality, there really is no difference. You need the same skill sets, a boat, knowledge of the local coastline, and working waterfront access, which is extremely important. You are just harvesting a different product. I will be going into my 5th season as a kelp farmer and have learned so much, usually through my own mistakes. It takes a lot of work to construct and seed a farm. Running 1,000 feet of seeded long lines only 15 feet apart, 5 to 7 feet below the surface without tangling is challenging. I call it 3-dimensional farming. Maine is perfectly positioned to continue to lead in this regenerative farming model that actively improves ocean health and makes coastal communities more resilient. But to do so, the DMR needs to be able to move good leases through the process faster so that family businesses can plan. I have had a standard lease application pending that was deemed complete 20 months ago, and I was recently notified that it will have a hearing in November. That will be almost 2 years. Maine lobstermen lead the country in seaweed farming, representing well over 70% of landings, and we are in the best position to lead in seaweed farming. We have an abundantly qualified workforce, and the market is ready. It's time to scale up responsibly and meet the demand, but in a way that ensures the farmers are successful. Kelp farming complements the lobster fishery. Kelp is seeded in November and harvested in April and May. It just grows over the course of the winter, which is the off-season for inshore lobstering. Kelp farms use areas that are not being used in the winter and makes them productive and profitable. The regulations are already strong and have proven to keep out unqualified applicants and unfitting plans. They also actively engage the community in the process. So, it's very important that DMR has the resources they need to do their job and move Maine forward as the leader in seaweed farming in the U.S. Kelp farming requires no arable land, pesticides, herbicides, or inputs of any kind. Kelp is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and growing this industry in a responsible and timely manner is in the best interest of the state and of our hard-working coastal communities. The opportunity for Maine's fishermen and coastal communities to participate in this growing industry provides the ability to diversify their income and add another revenue stream to Maine's working waterfront. It is working well for me and many others. I hope and expect to see many more join me in the coming years, and that would be success. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And last but not least, we have Bridget.
Hello, all. I'm Bridget Kahn, and I'm the Interim Assistant Director at Portland Adult Education. And I've been asked to come and talk today about a renewable energy training project that we recently developed and completed our first cohort. And I really feel like that training project is a representation of what Commissioner Johnson was talking about how workforce development can be the nexus between economic development and climate change action. So Portland Adult Ed serves about 2,000 academic and workforce students each year, and about 90%, close to 90% of those students are immigrants. And more, the population is often people who have come here highly skilled and internationally trained in professional fields that we need in Maine. Because of that, in 2013, the Maine legislature used Portland Adult Ed to establish a site for the New Mainers Resource Center. And that site, the New Mainers Resource Center, our mission is to help grow Maine's economic development by making sure that our immigrant populations are fully integrated into the workforce. And so one example of that is this project that came about over many years of a lot of different people's effort. So one population of highly trained people that we are seeing at Portland Adult Ed are engineers, specifically a lot of electrical engineers who are coming from many countries, often Angola and DRC, and they're coming here wanting to use their skills and unable to for lots of structural barriers and lots of reasons. Part of it is there's 6 months to a year where people are not even allowed to work. And then once they get their work permits, they are immediately needing to find housing and find work that can pay for their basic bills. So there's those issues, and then there's also the licensing issues. So for many, many people, working as an engineer in Maine has been impossible. And we've explored other avenues to make sure that they can use their skills and experience, like trying to develop ways for people to become licensed electricians. And even that has been very difficult for people who have backgrounds as electrical engineering. So when this opportunity came about to work with Revision Energy, who had developed an apprenticeship program for licensed electricians, it was a good opportunity for many of our students to start on a pathway back into their field. And this was a training project that is supported by the MDOL apprenticeship program, and at Adult Ed, we developed a pre-apprenticeship program to create a pipeline into renewable energy careers. And Revision, along with a few other employers, have really been a leader in this project. They have, in addition to the Master's Electrician apprenticeship, they also have apprenticeships for management that they're developing and for engineering. So this program had about 50 applicants. We started recruiting in the winter of last year, and we had 15 spots. All 15 students graduated. Many of them, as I mentioned, came here with professional backgrounds, came here with expertise. One person even worked in solar in DRC. And in that time, so we graduated at the end of May, and 8 of the graduates are now working in the field. 7 of them are solar installers, and they are on the pathway to becoming electrical master electricians through the apprenticeship. And one young woman who's over here on the side, she came with a graduate degree. She had just recently graduated in structural engineering, and she was hired as an engineer at Revision Energy. So people are able to integrate into the economy. They're able to bring their skills and grow and be able to meet Maine's climate goals. For example, so many of these students are working in solar, but we are also working towards people being in the heat pump industry. And as you know, there's a goal that was met for 100,000 households to have heat pumps, and that's been surpassed, and now it's another 175,000, and we need workers to be able to get into the field in order to meet those goals. So we're really excited about this project. We have just recently received funding to expand the new Mainers Resource Center from the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. And with that, we are creating 2 satellite sites at Bangor Adult Ed and at Lewiston Adult Ed, with the hopes of replicating projects like these throughout the state.
Well, thank you all so much. And there are kind of more questions we thought about for you all, so I want to pose them. And then sadly, I do need to leave you. So I will leave you all in their very capable hands. So maybe like a 1 to 2 minute response on the other questions that we talked about, and we'll go in reverse order. So for Bridget and Bob and Bridget, lots of B names here. In each of your stories, there's an element of calculated risk-taking by business owners. What does this risk-taking look like to you, and how is it critical to the success in these industries? And then for Jasmine and Bill, we're going to have, with so many challenges and complexities facing your communities, how do you keep your staff, committee members, and communities activated and focused? And I know those are very meaty questions for quick responses, so if there's a couple little helpful things you'd like to share in each of those, that would be awesome. And thank you all for having me. I need to step off, but really great panel, and thank you so much for all you're doing.
Okay, so I'll start, if I can remember the question. So risk, and I think I mentioned this about Revision Energy, that they were a key partner in developing their own apprenticeships, which led us to partner and develop a parallel program. We have seen people come with skills and education to Portland specifically and throughout the state for years. As I said, our NMRC has been here for 10 years. And so the need, and there was a lot of time when I would come to conferences and people, it would all be talking about the demographic winter of Maine and how, you know, our deaths are outpacing our births. And for so long, people weren't looking to the resources that were already here and that our people are coming here. And I think that there is an amount of calculated risk in being an employer that stands up to be a leader and says, we're going to do things differently. We're going to invest in both our workers and potential workers, and we're going to invest in the community who are people who may not be necessarily even coming to our company, but because of the investing in the health, that grows the industry. So just one example of that with Revision, as part of our program, we incorporated a certification called the EPA 608 into the training, which is required for people who want to start their own heat pump business. Well, we understand that many, many people want to have their own small businesses, and so this allows people to first work in the field, gain experience, and then eventually, hopefully, start their own heat pump businesses. And that, of course, it's an industry effort, and it's something that I think Revision took on as a leader, and we're really excited to be working with them.
Great.
So risk in kelp farming is probably not much different than risk in fishing. You're working, you know, out on the water, open water, somewhat protected water. So to mitigate that risk, first you need to site your farm in a place where it is most protected from winter storms. You can't put a farm just anywhere. So siting your farm is probably one of the most important things you can do. There's also a personal safety risk. We seed our farms working out of 14-foot skiffs in November, and in the first year it was December. So that can be challenging and cold. And the other thing I think that is most important is the financial risk. You are, you know, putting up tens of thousands of dollars, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on top of already owning a boat that is necessary for the harvesting side. And you have to wait over the course of the winter till you recoup hopefully some of your investment and possibly make a profit, probably not in your first year. So that's like in many businesses. So there's risk, but there's rewards. And I think this industry has tremendous potential to employ hundreds, eventually hundreds of fishermen, mostly fishermen, but you don't have to be a fisherman. They just happen to have the boat that you need to do it with. And it could be very successful as years to come.
Great. Thank you, Bridget and Bob, and now Jasmine. The hope. How do you stay hopeful?
I think it's one of the first.
And the first part, too. I just did this. We all need hope, so we appreciate you guys closing it out with that.
Awesome. So for the first question, how do we provide the committee members with focus with so many planned projects and community needs? We are really fortunate to have started at a time where there's so much funding available, and I know that's like a unique situation. So for the past year, we've kind of just been in a scramble to apply for as much funding as humanly possible. So, and we just kind of take it like one project at a time. So we're starting with the window insert build, and then the next grant that we got approved for was for our community solar project. So then that's kind of what we're focusing on right now, and then the next project will be whatever of the many sources of funding we've applied for comes through next. So just kind of taking it one step at a time.
Great.
Yeah, so how do we keep staff, committee members, and community community members activated and focused. You know, we look for opportunities to play to every cohort's strength and their interests, right? From public art to stormwater engineering. We are always looking for opportunities to give people ownership in this, you know, and that goes a long way when you're talking to employees of a public works department. Optics is a huge part of keeping our focus and top of mind. And that can be something as simple as the big 4x8 construction sign for the siphon sewer project that would normally be over on the construction site and you wouldn't see it. But instead we decided to put it right on Route 1 and right in the middle of downtown so that everybody does see it. We use the media extensively to get our stories out. This is part of the role of a local weekly. And then lastly, we try not to drape any of these initiatives in what I call, you know, a badge shift or a badge consequence. It's not that kind of requirement. Our focus is on solutions to problems and not so much on the political ideologies that may surround these problems, right? So we're trying to prepare our community and others by example to be better prepared for tomorrow. And if we focus on the problems and not the ideologies, that seems to be the best way for us to do it. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think I've already screwed up Ambassador Bryant's role, so I'm going to give you all one last sentence or two on how you remain hopeful in this work. Anybody want to kick it off in no particular order, since I've just thrown it at you? Jasmine's ready. You ready?
So what makes me hopeful is seeing all the positive energy that's come out of the community since we started the committee. You know, by providing people with a platform to make actionable change on the issues that affect the community, it's generated a lot of solutions-oriented thinking and a lot of motivation to solve these issues. So I would encourage anyone who has the time or motivation to start a citizen committee in their own community, because there's a lot of hope that's come out of it, at least for the Civic Resilience Committee. That's my
Great.
sentence.
I think so. We finished the program at the end of June, and so now people have been stopping in and saying hello after working for a few weeks, and that is an amazing thing to just see people come and say thank you. I finally feel like I get to use my skills. I feel like I'm growing. So I'm excited for more of that, more of maximizing our resources for shared solutions.
In working with fishermen over the years up and down the coast, I've met a lot of really smart, hardworking fishermen. And now there's a group of younger fishermen showing up as well. And that gives me hope that they are engaged. They're looking to diversify. And I know that the companies that are involved in kelp farming have a list of fishermen who want to get involved. So I think as the word gets out there that kelp farming is really beneficial to the lobster fishery, that more and more are going to be interested in getting in, and the market's going to grow. I know the market's going to grow, and it's going to be an opportunity for fishermen to have a spring paycheck, and I think that's really important.
And I find hope in a lot of things. And this room is one of them. We have a mind-blowing, there's probably 60 different people working on these 5 projects that we have going. And these people are brilliant. Tora Johnson is one right here, who I would like to recognize. You know, so there's hope in that. I was asked if there was an aha moment in this, and that's that there's no aha. You know, this is a grind. There is no finish line. This is the new normal. And so where you find hope is in incremental victories. And that's what we're putting our effort behind, and that's what we celebrate.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask the panel just to stay up here because we're going to do one last announcement and torture people slightly before lunch. But just stay here. But I want to give them a huge round of applause for the incredible work they're doing. So I'm sorry, we really are torturing you. You can smell the food. We're going to feed you. We're not going to talk to you during lunch. We're going to encourage you all to talk to each other and do whatever you need to do for that hour. But we wanted to close it out with actually an announcement of the continued progress that we are making in Maine's community. So we're going to show a quick video, possibly even featuring some people you know in this room. And then we're going to talk to you a little bit about some money going out to Maine communities today.
Everybody's got an issue around climate.
As you can see, we're kind of in a bowl.
The trend that we're seeing now is multiple ice outs per year.
If nothing was done, I mean, we'd be standing in sludge right now.
The brook trout used to sustain us as a people.
Climate change is here in Maine. We see it in different ways in different communities across the state.
You're talking to a retired science teacher, so yes, it's happening. Can we do something about it? Yes, if we act.
Where the action happens is in local communities.
It can be really hard to take big, bold steps towards resiliency and towards sustainability.
You can see how it took down the fort wall.
Community Resilience Grant builds capacity in communities, and it starts with a commitment. Who is going to work on this? What project are you going to do, and how can we help fund it?
Thinking behind the partnership was that we didn't want to be telling communities what they had to do. We wanted to put the communities in the driver's seat and make the state a partner to the actions that they needed to take.
This is a way that we can have these conversations. What are you seeing in your town? So, well, here's a solution that will help.
And I like to come out and check on them, get some pictures.
It's been inspiring to see communities really lean into the program and come up with different ways of using the funding that maybe we weren't expecting.
MSSM and the town of Limestone entered into a unique partnership. I don't know anything like it.
Well, this is the former Loring Air Force Base.
It's a municipality and a quasi-state public school joining forces to become owners and operators of our own solar project.
We call this Micmac Farms. For us, we look at long-term planning as one of the most important things that we can do as a tribe.
The ultimate goal will be to have enough solar arrays here to operate the current farm and then also our expansion.
Our goal in launching the Community Resilience Partnership was to have 100 communities participating. We're now up to 138.
When the tide gets up high, the flow backs up.
Rising sea levels has made it difficult for our wastewater treatment plant to pump out treated sewage into the bay.
We're going to be putting in a pump station.
Without the funding, we'd still be in the kind of panic. What are we going to do? How are we going to get funding for this?
There's a tradition of neighbors helping neighbors here. You know, if it's 20 below and your furnace goes out, we want people to know that they don't have to tough it out. You know, there are going to be options.
I was a child when the flood happened. I do remember it very well. So currently the river gauge that we have, it's old technology. We have to come down here to the pump house to check the river levels.
With the new monitoring system, it will contact us. It'll let us know where the river level is at.
It's one step closer to making the whole thing fully automated. That's our end goal.
The extreme projection sea level rise. This grant was a perfect storm, pun intended, of opportunities coming together.
It's inevitable that change is happening. Understanding what those changes are and how they're going to impact us as well as our neighbors and these places that we care about is really important.
What we want to do is show people with visuals what we can expect and what we should be planning for.
I do think there's a lot of momentum right now. Communities are seeing that they know what they can do now and they've got a pathway to do that.
Many of these community actions are things that these towns have been wanting to do for years, but they just never had the money.
The Community Resilience Grants really tipped the scales and made it much easier for both entities to commit to a really ambitious, cool project.
We've got to all move in that direction and get these projects done so that we can make a difference.
Really exciting to see state and local governments starting to really step up and take some action, realizing that through community is how we're going to address these issues. that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Great. So we'll make this quick, but we're excited to end on just a quick announcement of continued good news. I will say that, as many of you know, Maine Won't Wait recommended that the state provide leadership and robust technical assistance and funding to communities by 2024. So back in 2020, we were hedging. Hopefully by 2024, we can come up with the money. So the good news is in 2021, in December of 2021, we launched this program. We set a goal to enroll at least 100 communities in the first year. We achieved it. We are now, as you will hear, we are on our way to 200 communities. Thanks again to many of the legislators in this room, we now have $3 million a year to give out to communities to reduce carbon emissions, to transition to clean energy, and to prepare their communities to be more resilient to the impacts of climate. So we have 174 communities participating, 129 have enrolled, another 45 are working on it, and we are very excited that today we are announcing another new 53 community grant awards. I will pass it off to Ashley Krulik, who leads this program, but I also want to recognize they're standing together so perfectly. Brian M. Brett, Sarah Kern, I know Caroline from the Governor's Energy Office is also here, who do a ton of lifting. You saw Brian in the video, but really make this program work. So I'm going to pass it off to Ashley for the exciting details.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm literally the last person between you all and lunch, so I will make it brief. But I feel so very fortunate to be able to make this announcement today. And so, yes, in our third round of applications, we received 74 proposals for a total of $3.8 million in requested funding. So we had to make some really strategic, tough decisions, and 49 proposals covering 53 communities were awarded a total of $2.4 million in grant funds. So all those communities on the board have received funds in this latest round, and every community that has an asterisk after the name is a first-time applicant. So these communities are using the grant funds to take on climate and energy priority actions that are in alignment with the objectives outlined in Maine Won't Wait, including conducting climate vulnerability studies, installing high-efficiency heating and cooling systems, expanding bike pedestrian infrastructure to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and transitioning to renewable energy and developing resilience plans. In addition, we also made 8 awards to service providers to assist an additional 25 communities to join the partnership and then apply for grants in the next round. Since inception, this program has awarded nearly $6.1 million to 103 communities statewide. And this work is also supported by an ongoing pilot with 4 regional coordinators to assist communities to develop more complex projects and seek federal funding. So to get involved in the Community Resilience Partnership, communities can join at any time. They can self-enroll or work with a service provider. There's 5 steps to enroll, and these have been specifically designed to reduce the barrier to entry and be accessible for all communities. These steps don't need to be completed in a specific order, but to run through them quickly. So first, communities need to complete a self-evaluation to assess how the community is addressing resilience in existing planning and operations. Hold a community workshop to review the self-assessment and prioritize projects. A key factor in this step is robust community participation to ensure a diverse group of voices are heard from the community. 3, the partnership has developed a list of 72 actions that align with objectives in Maine Won't Wait. A community can review these and indicate what they have already done, what's in progress, and what their high priorities are for the future. And then they need to adopt a municipal resolution that establishes a citizen committee or staff member to coordinate activities and make the community more resilient to climate change. Once all these steps are complete, they can go ahead and submit their materials for enrollment and start applying for grants. And if your communities are not already involved and interested in getting involved, please reach out to me. All right, thank you all so much.